across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning. Happy Friday to you. Glorious day. Hottest day of the year. Fingers crossed. Let us all do a little sun dance, shall we? I'm certainly looking forward to going and getting into a little bit of UV later. And, oh, look, Julian Hitchens says, yay, Alex is here. Let the desk thumping commence. I think Julie knows already that I'm going to get very upset about a certain story. And this is before I'd even said anything. KTR, Kev the Red, apparently, has said, had this Egyptian gang rapist been convicted of murder in Egypt, or was he just on the run after escaping prior to arrest? Well, I don't know about the details, but he was wanted for murder, wasn't he? I am really going to blow my lid on this one. Not yet, though. Let's start off calmly, shall we? And when I get round to it, yeah, she will blow. Let's speak to Philip Kissley, Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. Philip, always great to have you on the programme. Let's start off with domestic politics, because there has been a mega poll. And the mega poll shows us, well, what the polling itself for a number of weeks has been starting to show us, which is this sort of quite a dramatic split where a lot of parties are hanging around a similar level. The right and the left is still sort of split, as traditionally they always have been, but they've sort of fragmented with the emergence of insurgent parties such as Reform and the Greens. And so it looks as though any parties are going to need to form an alliance if they're going to form a government. Nigel Farage, however, has basically said, nope, not interested. The Tories don't deserve to be anywhere near government, despite there being a number of former Tory ministers among Reform's ranks. But I think the reality of the situation, I think political pragmatism, no one has to make any deals yet, but I think political pragmatism at the end of the day will win.
Yeah, I think so too, and we're still quite a long way off from the need to make these decisions, aren't we? We've got a first past the post system with a levelling out as well, and that's going to be very, very complicated. I think what we're seeing is, I've just been, like everybody else, I've just been obsessed with what's been happening to Keir Starmer and the Labour Party over the last week or so. And I think we're seeing not only the end of Keir Starmer, but the complete destruction of the Labour Party as a meaningful force in politics. And what that means is the left now won't be able to hide under that kind of veneer of respectability and is going straight to the Greens. The Greens will become a force, and yes, they'll be allied with the Labour Party, but I think something that this poll doesn't mention, actually, they'll also be allied with so-called independents, which are essentially Islamist MPs, and there will be, I would suspect, they will burgeon in numbers, and that will be a really frightening alliance. So I think the key thing here is it's not just about alliances. It's not just about this terrifying red-green alliance. It's also about participation. So if we go back to Gorton and Denton and we think about Matt Goodwin's really heroic campaign there, but even though he was knocking on doors almost 24 hours a day, he had a team out there, 53% of people didn't bother to vote, Alex. So it's not just about alliances. As I say, it's about participation. If we want to keep these left Islamist loons away from power, then people need to get out and put a cross on a piece of paper and shove it in the polling box, because really we are in a terrible situation here. If we don't have at least some kind of semblance of real meaningful leadership, a party that can make decisions, then we are looking at civil unrest in the streets. We are looking at chaos. And the British people, it's a very low bar. We just don't want chaos.
Yeah.
We want a break from it. And so to achieve that very modest aim, people need to get out and vote.
Interesting. Donald Trump has sort of conducted a little bit of an intervention from across the pond, where he's basically said, look, if Starmer wants to save himself, it's really easy. Drill in the North Sea, stop the madness over immigration. But it was easy from the beginning. That is the recipe that anybody who wants to please the British public needs to follow. That has been the recipe for a very long time. It's not just under this government. We have the highest energy bills in the world. That's been going on for a long time now, and it's not just under this government that we've had mass immigration and mass illegal immigration. That's why the Tories were voted out. The recipe for the Labour Party was very simple, and I have to ask myself, why is it that no government, not just in the UK, but frankly across Europe, seems to be able to deal with these issues? And so as a result, we're seeing the fracturing of legacy parties, not just here, but it's happened all over the place. Why can't governments in Europe just go, right, do you know what? We need to get real about energy policy and net zero. We're impoverishing our people and deindustrialising. And we need to get real about the mass migratory flows. They're all as defiant as one another. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling, because we never voted for any of this. And you poll anybody from 100 people to 100,000 people, you will get the same responses. We want security. We want closed borders, I think, now. We want an absence of chaos. But I think what's happening in Europe is it's the end of this liberal era, isn't it? Which is defined by two things. One is this ridiculous virtue and virtue signaling, but the other is this kind of misplaced guilt as well. So we welcome all of these lunatics, and perhaps we might talk about possibly one of the most awful stories I've read for such a long time in a minute, but we welcome these absolute lunatics into our country, and we put women and children at risk, and we do that for these stupid ideological, philosophical reasons. And it isn't just politics. As we've said before, the two of us have had quite detailed conversations about this. It's the blob, it's the mechanisms that frustrate democracy. It's these people who literally know nothing and have no experience of real life, civil servants and so on and so forth. All of these people that define and rule our lives, and that needs to be taken apart. It needs to be thrown away. We need radical change here, because it's existential. We are looking at an existential threat, and it's not just this country, it's Europe and the West. And Alex, I've got lots of Jewish friends and people who are just so alarmed, and they're thinking, well, where the hell can we go? Right? We need to get out of this country because it is an anti-Semitic hellhole. But if we go to Europe, it's going to be the same. Pedro Sanchez, where are we going to go?
Oh, that man is an absolute
people are looking to Central America
enemy
and
of
South America.
living civilization. The guy is just absolutely, he's gone tonto. Who does that? Who suddenly goes, 500,000 people, here you go, come and live in Spain, or you randos from all corners of the world? Who does that? Honestly, these people infuriate me. They're leaving damage for generations, because of their foolhardy, vainglorious decisions. There's going to be children being born today, tomorrow, next week, next year, who are going to grow up in countries that are frankly unrecognisable to those their parents enjoyed, because of people like Mr. Sanchez and his colossal ego. They make me sick. Let's talk now about Nigel Farage, because he's done a big interview with the Mail covering all sorts of things. But he's talking about the real split in society, and he might have a point here. The real split in society isn't on generation. It's not even race or religion necessarily. It is about those who work and those who do not, what he likes to call alarm clock Britain, and then all sorts of people sitting around on welfare. Because what we do know is that now, for one of the first times ever, we pay more in welfare than we receive in taxes from people who are actually getting up in the morning and going to work. And he's talking about needing to tear up things like PIP payments to people with mild mental health issues. He's suddenly seen the light and decided to scrap the idea of lifting the two-child benefit cap. I don't quite understand why he went down that route. And he says, yeah, we're going to face riots on the street. We will face people protesting. We'll face all the unions gobbing off. We don't care, because this needs to be done. He wants to also make sure that foreigners aren't entitled to any sorts of benefits payments. I don't see why they should be. I mean, again, you read this stuff and it's quite radical, and people are going to take to the streets, and you think, how has this sort of policy become radical, that you're not giving Mr. and Mrs. whoever money to come and live in Britain when they weren't born here? I mean, it just, these are commonsensical things, and you sort of think to yourself, how have we got to a stage where, Tanya's decided she don't want to go to work, she's going to sit under a slag blanket and watch Bridgerton, is being paid to do so. I just don't. From my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, I've got no idea how in Britain in the 21st century all of these things have come to pass.
No, there's nothing radical about it. It is just common sense, and we can't. The problem is we cannot carry on like this. The ship will sink, and when that happens, as you say, we are going to see absolute real chaos. But we're in this. It's not just economic. It's cultural as well, isn't it? And we have a whole class of people who literally don't want to do anything, who feel as though it's down to people like you and me, not only to pay for them, but to pay for their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. And so, like, Alex, I can't do it. I can't afford to do it. And I know people listening to this, they can't afford to do it at all. But it's young people as well. We're developing a generation where people, this is the really terrifying thing for me, and this is tragic, okay? Young people who don't want to go out and grab the world by the scruff of the neck and change it and make their mark. They'd rather sit at home and watch daytime television. Now that is a time bomb, right? That for our country, our culture and our society, that is a time bomb. We will just go down the sewer, and we desperately need to do something about this. I'll tell you a very, very quick story. As you know, I spent a long time, decades in higher education, and towards the end of that career, students would hand in essays, and there was nothing in place that would force them to hand their essay in on time. So nobody ever did. There were mitigating circumstances. So this, I'm tired today, or it's a Tuesday, or I've stubbed my toe, and no one would do anything about it. That we don't have boundaries, we don't have standards, and we don't have expectations anymore. For me, that's the real basic expectations of how people should behave. If we have those building blocks in place, then we will do far better as a society.
You're right, and this horrible characteristic of the 21st century permeates almost everything. People saying, why have we got such a low birth rate? Because quite frankly, people can't be bothered taking on the responsibility of marriage and kids. They want to be lifelong Peter Pans. Is a huge part of what's going on. It's not just about economics and can you buy a house. Quite frankly, there's a load of feckless men out there who don't want to have to be fathers. But equally, we've got now generations who have been brought up. They've been raised on the teat of instant gratification. I want food. Go on to, one of these food delivery platforms, order whatever you like, and it's at your house in half an hour. I want to watch TV. Well, you've got 500,000 channels on, terrestrial alone, as well as all these other apps and sites. I want to speak to someone, but I can't be bothered getting off the sofa. Great, I'll just WhatsApp them instead. Nothing needs to be worked for anymore. Nothing. And the sort of hunter-gatherer in humankind just seems to be dying. They seem to have given up, crawled back into the cave to, like I said, sit under a blimmin' slanket. It's pathetic. And I think until we actually manage to look at what's going on psychologically and culturally, because I don't think anyone's really talking about this, they're looking in all the wrong corners, they're looking under all the wrong rocks. They think that, magical solutions are just going to emerge out of nowhere to get people having kids and going to work. And I'm like, it's not going to change until stuff like this fundamentally gets removed from people's lives. I know I'm probably one of the only people on the right wing who thinks this, but I'm very much for the idea of banning smartphones for people under the age of 16, so they might grow up learning to speak to one another and being productive.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and I think more people would agree with you than you think, actually. I think there's one thing we have done. I think what we've done in this society is pathologize work. Okay, so work and stress are supposedly bad for you. And of course, the opposite is true. Achieving things, making your mark is the best thing you can possibly have for mental health. It's that, getting out and doing things and saying, I've done that. At the end of the day, I've done that is the best thing you can possibly do. And we need to inculcate that in not only in young people, but in older people as well who are lounging around on the dole. The other thing is responsibility. Okay. Responsibility allows you to grow as a person, and the emphasis is all wrong. It's all on rights. Nothing is about responsibility. If you're a homeowner, if you're a business owner, if you have children, if you have a family, and you're a man, you're responsible for all of those things, then you will act better in society because you are bought into society and it means something. It's about what you can. I don't want to get too evangelical about this, but it's about what you can give rather than what you can take. Because if you can change your mindset into that way, then you will just automatically get more back. Because living in a society and partaking in a culture is an exchange, and you have to give something.
I totally agree. I liked you going on existential. It's quite nice. Right, we're going to take a short break, but the story that is on everyone's lips is what we're going to be discussing just after this. So I'm going to rev myself up and get ready for a good old-fashioned rant, I think. See you in just a moment.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Have you read it? Have you actually read the details of what those disgusting, feral demons did to that woman? Have you read it? The asylum seekers who filmed themselves spitting on her, slapping her face, calling it foreplay as she drifted in and out of consciousness. Have you read about the details of that attack? This poor, innocent girl going about her life in full freedom. And do you want to know? Do you want to know his excuse, our friend from Egypt, our little murderer mate that we've been putting up in a hotel? Oh, he struggled to understand consent. He told the court, rape, to me, is sex. Because it is. Because to a lot of these men coming over on boats into our country illegally, that is exactly their mindset. That is exactly their attitude. Because in their home countries, if a woman so much as shows off an ankle, it is considered too titillating for their wild, uncontained, badly brought up sexual proclivities. They can't resist it, can they? No, get your hair out. You probably deserve to be dragged behind a beach hut and defiled. It's utterly disgusting. And yes, the man was convicted of murder and somehow, despite apparently undergoing asylum checks and security checks, yeah, just stay here. We don't know if that murder happened or not. If you say it didn't, probably didn't, did it, son? Oh, right, so why did he leave Egypt then? A numbskull could figure out the man was clearly on the run and a ne'er-do-well and a risk to society. But do you know what? Do you know what? I don't even blame so much these disgusting creatures who are brought up to regard women as chattel and meat with these vile attitudes. They should go back to their own sin-filled countries and do what they like there. That is none of our business in the United Kingdom. The people I want rotten vegetables thrown out in the streets are the people behind these decisions, the judges, people in the Home Office, politicians who seem to want to shower themselves in glory and faux moral righteousness. They want to look good around their dinner party tables, bragging to their friends how they're not the far-right thugs who seem to go out and protest every time yet another incident like this happens. Those people are morally bankrupt. It's blood on their hands. It's rape on their hands. It's their decisions. It's their terrible political compass. It is their egocentric, vile vanity that means these things keep happening, that every day I open a newspaper, another woman's life has been destroyed. And it's not just the women who have been attacked. It's their families. It's their friends. It's every mother with a daughter. It's every schoolgirl walking home, leaving the school gates, unable to fend for herself when predators like this are roaming the streets. It is every single woman in this country who is being abused by this government, who continue to gaslight us, tell us they're doing something about it, smashing the gangs. You've done nothing. And the recipe is very easy to follow. You could do something, and you could do something today. You could get rid of the Human Rights Act, put in emergency legislation and say no. And say to France, do you know what? We're leaving all the treaties, and right now anyone crossing the channel is going to be sent straight back to your shores. We could turn these army camps that apparently are being used to house migrants now into detention centres. We can build chicken wire fences around them. We can put yobs and predators like that in secure containment before sending them on their merry way back from whence they came. You know, Starmer could swallow his stupid pride and reinstate the Rwanda scheme. Now, multiple other European countries are looking at that as potentially a good idea, but no, they don't care. The rape, the torture, the abuse of this woman and countless others, all the victims of the grooming gangs as well, it doesn't matter. The lives, the integrity, the security, the innocence of girls in this country means nothing, nothing to these vile politicians who would rather grandstand while having the audacity, the temerity to call all the rest of us far right when we notice what they've done. They're going to rot in hell. They really disgust me. I had to get it off my chest. I knew you knew that was coming. Philip, what did I miss?
You didn't really miss anything there, Alex, and I think for me, I read this story today, and this is symbolic of what's happening across the country. It's the rape of Britain, isn't it? What packs of primitive, feral, foreign males abducting innocent women off the street, raping them, spitting on them, humiliating them, and then saying, oh, but rape for me is sex. Right? That really sums it up, and that's always the defense. So, you know, the powers that be, the politicians, the blob, the human rights lawyers, they are definitely and knowingly bringing rapists into this country, putting women and children at risk, knowingly and happily, and doing it under a banner of virtue. And here we are. So what we've got to do is we've got to be angry. Women and children as well. Children need to know about this. But isn't this the most terrible thing, right? That children, innocent children, need to know that when they go out on the street to play with their mates, there's potentially going to be a rapist who's going to abduct them and gang rape them, right? Because this isn't just This isn't just psychopaths. This is actually a cultural practice in some of these places.
That's what I'm saying. It is. It is. And do you know what? We're not allowed to say that, are we? Oh, no, it's racist to point out that in countries such as Egypt, they've got this thing called rushing, where if a young woman standing by herself, they will gather around her to create a protective shield for themselves. And in the middle of the circle, they'll all be groping her, tearing at her clothes, sexually assaulting her. It is part of their culture. And we've got to wake up and say it like it is, because that culture has no place in British society. And what's more is a lot of these young men getting on the boats to come to Britain, they're not always just coming to get more money. I mean, I think vanishingly few of them are coming because they're genuine asylum seekers. A lot of them are coming to do this. We've got to realise that, because they won't get away with it in their own countries. You can tell by some of the things, the slapping the faces, foreplay, dragging people by hair and the spitting. He's been loaded up on pornography, hasn't he? He's been sitting there watching multiple videos of women who probably look very Western being slapped and spat on and sexually abused and humiliated. And that's why he has come here and wants to do it here and filmed it and showed all of his mates to have a good old laugh in the asylum centre. Yeah, why don't you go and do the same? If you stand outside that nightclub at 2 o'clock in the morning, you can pick one for yourself. A lot of these men are coming here as rape tourists. I'm sorry, they are. And I don't care. I don't care if I get into trouble for saying that, because me getting into trouble for saying a blimmin' fact on air is worth a lot more than just closing my mouth, closing my eyes and letting this continue. I hope many voices turn round and say, we've had enough, because just one more sex attack on one more woman is one too many. And it's the people responsible, frankly, who we need to take to task over this.
I think so, and I think there needs to be real ramifications. I mean, you know, when this era comes to an end, and hopefully it will be very, very soon, these people need to be standing up in court. They need to be answering for this, because they are literally responsible for the gang rape and death of so many women and children. This ruins people's lives on a personal level. This absolutely destroys people. This destroys vulnerable people, but it also destroys our society. It destroys trust. It destroys cohesion. We have none of that, and people don't realize how quickly things are changing and how dangerous it really is out there. I just went into the towns. I just live around the corner from the town centre here. Lots of feral males hanging around, and you just know what they're thinking about. And the key thing you said there was really important. Pornography is a massive factor in this. It's a massive factor generally in how males can't control themselves or indeed have relationships these days. It's a huge problem. But when you get someone from a primitive Stone Age society that not only thinks women and children are there to be used sexually, but they're actually barter material and there to be humiliated, then you have a massive, massive problem, and we need to do something about it. This is 1970 style national emergency territory here, but nothing will happen. This is the thing, nothing will happen. And you have to say to yourself, how far do we have to, what actually needs to happen before, for example, we put women and children first and we take their safety seriously and their dignity as well. But the other thing as well, Alex, sorry to interrupt, but this is important as well. Jews as well, okay? How long before we actually take the safety of Jews seriously, before we do more than saying, oh, there is no place for anti-Semitism or sexual abuse in this society? Clearly there is. It's happening all the time.
Yeah. No, I agree. And what's more, you know, the way that politicians and a lot of the media react to this stuff is so telling. I mean, the absolutely vile case of the young girl who was kidnapped, raped and murdered by the policeman. Utterly vile. And politicians just delighted in grandstanding about that. But then this girl, who's been raped by an asylum seeker, will they be asking questions at PMQs? Will they be asking for an inquiry into whether these asylum seekers should be let out of these blimmin' premises they're kept in? Where's the urgent debate in Parliament? This is going on and on and on. And the reason they don't care, the reason they're not interested is because the perpetrator is not white. That's why.
Yeah, it's ultimately it's about preserving their view of the world, their ideology, and their place in the system. We have this left-wing narcissistic culture that pervades everything, and they are totally blind, willfully obtuse. They will not see what's happening in front of their face. But it's more than that. It's an Orwellian turning things around on their head. If you point this out, if you get angry, if you show concern, then you are somehow a literal Nazi and worse than Hitler. So what people need to do, again, do you know what? Again, this comes down to this notion of participation, right? People need to look at what's happening out there and do something about it. And the way you can do something about it is, first and foremost, is get out there and vote, actually. Get these scumbags out of power, and then if we sort the politics out, then maybe we can sort the blob out. Maybe we can sort the human rights lawyers out. I'm not saying we can at this stage. Actually, that's how depressed I am. Okay, but maybe we can do something, and we have a last chance. And by God, Alex, we've got to take it.
Well, we do. We do, because like you've alluded to already, or said out loud, if things don't change, then society is going to completely fracture and people are going to rise up. I'm sure of it. Oh, Philip, well, there you go. Expended a bit of energy in the first half hour, didn't we? I'd feel a bit miserable now. Oh, listen, nonetheless, it was good to have catharsis with you. Communal catharsis, as I like to say. I'm so horrified by this story. I just can't even... Sometimes I feel like I've got to sit on my hands for want of, want to do something, and I don't know what I can do anymore. Right, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, let us talk about everything going on in America with Matt Terrell, who is a Republican strategist and former advisor to Marco Rubio, because things are hotting up a little bit. Are they? Are they not in Iran? But also, things are hotting up in terms of the special relationship between the US and America. King Charles is heading over there to try and calm things down a bit and rebuild bridges. But Donald Trump's been mouthing off about Prince Harry. He loves doing that. And also he's turned around and said, you know those Falkland Islands that you seem to think are yours? I might not support you on that anymore. It's not looking good between us. We're discussing that just after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello And welcome back. Now, things aren't looking too good between the US and the UK right now. Donald Trump has suggested he could punish Britain by reviewing support for the UK claim to the Falkland Islands. This is according to documents in an internal Pentagon email that laid out options to get back at NATO allies, who the president says were not there when he needed them in Iran. He's repeatedly slammed NATO as a paper tiger, even hinted at leaving the alliance altogether. But instead, this note, which was described to Reuters by an anonymous US official, basically said that because Europe refused to give the US access to basing and overflight rights, so not just preventing them using their own air bases in Europe, but preventing them flying over territory as well when it came to Iran, that, you know, Trump considers this the absolute baseline for NATO. I must admit, I tend to agree. But it's now being suggested that America could be reviewing support for long-standing European imperial possessions. Maybe not so hasty there, because we're about to give away the Chagos Islands, remember, Mr. Trump. But these included the Falkland Islands, which, of course, are just off the coast of Argentina. And Donald Trump has a very good friend indeed in Milei, the libertarian president of Argentina. Well, who might know a thing or two about this? I would imagine the guy who's a former advisor to Marco Rubio might have a thing or two to say, so let's speak to him now. Matt Terrell joins us. Matt, great to be talking to you. It's the first time that we've been together on a show, but what do you make of this leaked email? Do you think there's any validity to it? Is this the way that perhaps Donald Trump's government are thinking about NATO and thinking about the UK right now?
Well, first and foremost, great to be with you. And as it relates to NATO and the UK, we'll see what takes shape here. We've got an upcoming visit coming up here soon with respect to Washington and UK relations. But look, in the end, I think President Trump has had grave concerns with how the UK government has handled Iran, and NATO has handled Iran. I mean, look, the reality is the United States spends more money on NATO than any other country within NATO. On top of that, the threat that comes out of Iran, the threat of Iran having a nuclear capability, that's not just a threat to the United States. It's a clear and direct threat to the UK, to Europe, to NATO. We saw that with Iran lying about how far its missile capabilities could go. We saw that when they launched attacks against Diego Garcia. So the reality is getting rid of Iran's nuclear capabilities, doing what President Trump is doing with respect to this conflict is the right course. It doesn't just make the United States safer, it makes the UK safer and stronger as well. I think President Trump expected and hoped that UK government would do more. They haven't. That's been a big challenge.
I couldn't agree with you more. And yet I don't understand what's happened with the collective mental illness of many European leaders who didn't just say, well, we don't want you using your US bases in our countries, but actually prevented them flying over their countries, when it's been patently obvious for so long that Iran is a demonic, tyrannical, theocratic regime that doesn't just pose a danger to its own people and massacre them they have been doing, but seems to pose a danger to everybody on planet Earth. And yet these are the same Europeans, these armchair critics. We can throw Prince Harry on that pile now, can't we? Because he's been over in Ukraine moaning that America's not doing more to help. But they were the ones who, when Iran was massacring the protesters and America had all of its assets in the theatre of war, they go, why aren't you doing anything? Are you going to go and help Iran after all? Are you not doing anything? Oh, taco, Trump's chickened out. And then when Trump goes, right, we're doing it, they suddenly are complaining and don't want him to. What is your plan, they keep saying? What is your strategy? What is the outcome? Well, I didn't hear them explaining to Donald Trump what their strategy and their plan was about the war of attrition going on between Ukraine and Russia right now, because Europe just arms Ukraine just about enough to keep everything going and then demands America picks up the check. I didn't hear Trump saying, well, what is your plan over there? Because they clearly don't have one. I don't understand what has gotten hold of Western Europe. I mean, Americans, you know, people like Marco Rubio sitting there going, I don't think we can trust them anymore. I'm not sure we can actually even share intelligence with them.
Yeah, look, everything you said, I think, is spot on. I think you have a situation here. We're at a crossroads. You know, for decades, the United States has been spending money on NATO, being the biggest defender in terms of defense spending in NATO. And yet at a moment where the United States needed the help of NATO, our allies they were nowhere to be found by and large as relates to the Iranian conflict. And again, I go back to this is a serious issue with Iran's abilities to have a nuclear weapon. It doesn't just impact the United States, it impacts Europe, impacts NATO. And look, the truth is President Trump is the only president, the only world leader to actually do something about this horrific regime. This is a regime that has killed thousands of its own people. It's killed U.S. personnel. This is a regime that has been the greatest state sponsor of terrorism. And yet you have countries around the world, our allies, who are refusing to stand with us when it comes to standing against this regime. The question is, whose side are you on? The regime side or the U.S. Israeli forces side that have been leading this effort? That's the key question. And I think that people around the world, citizens around the world, recognize what President Trump has been doing here. This regime has not been handled correctly for decades by world leaders. President Trump has stood up and done the right course, the right thing. I would think he would have expected that his allies, our allies, would have stood with him.
I expected it, and I'm disgusted that we did not, quite frankly. I think probably what's gone on here, in part, is a lot of Western European countries especially are worried about retaliation from Muslim communities if they get involved in anything in the Middle East, which is terrifying, the fact we've got a fifth column, a tail wagging a dog when it comes to foreign policy. But I also think they don't have any capabilities. You know, Britain's been proven to be utterly inept, especially when it comes to our naval abilities. We also seem to be utterly inept when it comes to picking people to be ambassador to America. What is your reaction to what's been uncovered now? I mean, look, anyone from Britain could have told you Peter Mandelson was always a wrong-un. He was infamous for being a wrong-un and should never have been appointed to that role in a month of Sundays. What seemed to possess the Prime Minister in making that decision? I can only guess. I would worry, if I were America right now, that this government we have are far too connected with regimes that they shouldn't be. And Peter Mandelson was very representative of that. But what has been the reaction in America to all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question. I think Americans who are looking at this appointment of Mandelson was a terrible appointment. I mean, look, this is somebody who has had issues in government in Mandelson in the late 1990s and early 2000s. It's somebody that, you know, was obviously clearly a terrible pick and a terrible choice. And for, you know, Prime Minister Starmer, we'll see where this unfolds. I'll just tell you politically, there are certain things you want to have politically. Number one, you want to be on the offense. Right now, the Prime Minister is politically on the defense. On top of that, you want to appear as someone who's in control. And right now, it looks like the Prime Minister was out of the loop. You know, the truth is, if he's saying that he didn't know all these things, it makes him look like he was out of the loop. That's not a good sign. That is not a good thing to have if you're a leader of any country. So, look, I think, you know, it's clear that President Trump, believes that the Prime Minister can recover politically from this, but there's other challenges that the Prime Minister has. You've got issues of illegal immigration that people across the UK are upset about. You have issues related to oil and energy independence in the UK that people are concerned about. So I think he's got a number of problems taking place politically. But with that said, I think the president wants to work with this prime minister. I think President Trump wants to have good relations between the US and the UK. But obviously, this was a terrible appointment, no question about it.
I'm afraid we've got a terrible Prime Minister. I'm glad that Donald Trump still thinks highly of the United Kingdom, but he's never going to get much out of this government. But interestingly, here's a suggestion. So I think this piece is written rather curiously, but apparently the Met Police, Scotland Yard, are investigating Lord Mandelson and have come to America and said, look, we want all of your evidence from the Epstein emails in order to continue to investigate Mandelson. And America said, well, look, if you're going to do this, you've got to do it properly. With the Department of Justice saying that Scotland Yard needs to submit a formal application, mutual legal assistance, which could take up to 18 months. My suggestion here is give them the Epstein files, ask for the Chagos ones in return, because I have a feeling if Congress subpoenaed the lawyers behind that particular deal, connected to Mandelson, connected to our Attorney General, connected to our Prime Minister, and followed the money, I think you might find some rather eyebrow-raising things.
Well, we'll see what the DOJ does here. Obviously, we have a protocol here in the United States. I'll let the administration speak to that component of it. But look, as it relates to the Epstein component here, yes, it's clear that there was a connection, if you will, between Mandelson and Epstein. We'll see how that unfolds here. But the other truth of this, and I've seen some reporting on this, the Epstein connection and that component of all this, President Trump and the DOJ has released many files and information as relates to the Epstein case. I think the key here, obviously, with this Epstein situation is recognizing he was a horrific human being. Now, just because people had a connection to him or were in the same room as him doesn't mean they did anything wrong. But obviously, this needs to be investigated. I think it's important anything related to Epstein is investigated properly. I think the DOJ has been doing that effectively here in the United States. And as it relates to Mandelson and Prime Minister Starmer, this is just another component of how this is just a horrific look. I mean, you go back to the 2008 economic collapse. You go back to other components of information that Mandelson appeared to be sharing with Epstein. That's obviously grave concern. But you got to let the investigation take its course on this and let that process take action. I think that's what the administration is trying to do here.
I'm pretty certain that Mandelson was deliberately picked to try and flog to President Trump the idea that the Chagos Islands being given away to Mauritius was a good thing. Like I said, I think someone in America needs to start looking into this seriously. So I don't know if you still speak to your old boss, but you might suggest to him that they demand all the files surrounding Chagos. You might be doing us a favour if we can bring down this Prime Minister. Matt, thank you ever so much. It's been a delight having you on the programme. Now, given what's going on in Iran and the partial blockade or closure of the Strait of Hormuz, jet fuel is having quite a lot of difficulty in finding its ways over to Europe. And of course, because we don't access any of our own fossil fuels and we don't really keep anything in storage ready for a crisis, why would we? We're so flippant, aren't we? It turns out that airline tickets this summer could be facing an enormous price crisis. Many flights might even have to be cancelled. How bad is it? How 11th hour is it? We're going to be catching up with the brilliant travel guru Simon Calder just after this.
I hope I wouldn't have used that. Well, certainly I don't remember trying to get any job for my mates.
Can you get a job? Can you help get a job for ex's mates? But don't tell the Foreign Secretary.
I don't think it's completely surprising that the Prime Minister would be so sensitive about the way in which he was dealing with a member of his senior team, and particularly a Director of Communications who's in minute-by-minute contact with the media, that he would want that kept to a very, very tight group of people at the time.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Don't know about you, but if you were around in the 90s, the peak of civilization, the best decade ever, you probably enjoyed some of Chris Evans' output from The Big Breakfast to especially TFI Friday. I loved it. Didn't we all? Sad that it went, but it didn't. It's back. I'm not even joking. This is not some sort of late April Fool's. TFI Friday is going to be back on screens. Chris Evans and TFI have returned to the original home of Channel 4. It's going to be on over the next 5 Friday nights from 11 p.m. Now, this is sort of, in collaboration with Virgin Radio, just down there where Chris is sitting, just a few studios down right now. So he's been doing this secretly here on floor 17 of Talk Towers. Not so secret anymore because it's going to be on Channel 4. So if I were you, if you're a fan of the original, tune in 11 o'clock tonight. All right. Going on holiday anytime soon? Well, you might not be if there's no jet fuel to get you there. What is the situation? Let's speak to Simon Calder, travel correspondent for The Independent. Always great to have you on, the most famous man in travel journalism. How bad is the situation? I've read a number of airlines like Lufthansa are sort of thinking of cancelling flights. Ryanair is saying, well, maybe we won't be able to do some of these sort of, more niche flights anymore. British Airways pilots are also talking about going on strike. Will anyone be taken off for anywhere this summer?
Look, I am so cross, if you don't mind me saying so, Alex, about the way so many people are feeling really upset about their prospects for the summer. And this is being fueled by loose talk. So let me tell you what the situation is. Yes, exactly as you say, Lufthansa and KLM have cancelled flights in the thousands. But guess what? They're not doing that because they're running out of aviation fuel and they want to conserve it. They're doing it because if the price of aviation fuel doubles and you haven't hedged, locked into low prices for your fuel for all of it, then the best way to avoid marginal routes being turned into heavy loss makers is just to ground those flights. But they're not really going to affect people. And even if there were a minor effect on the UK, let's take Scotland as 5 flights a day on Lufthansa from Glasgow and Edinburgh to Frankfurt. And if you just said to the people in Glasgow, sorry, do you mind going over to Edinburgh? I know it's a bit of a nuisance, but we'll get your bus ticket. That's what's going to happen. There are fantastic deals around, and I was so cross when Dan Jurgensen, the EU Commissioner for Energy, said, oh, holiday 2026 summer, you've got to be joking. The price will be through the roof and you probably won't get there. I slightly paraphrase, but that's completely not the case. I have been buying tickets left, right and centre. There's so many fantastic deals out there. It's one of those summers, Alex, where actually it's a buyer's market, even in the peak months of July and August. So I don't know if you've got £83 and you could join me on the plane from Luton to Mykonos, Greek island, in the middle of July, peak summer month. I mean, that's a ridiculous fare. I'm seeing Birmingham to Beauvais in northern France, peak August Saturdays, and that's £44 return. There's loads of deals out there. The airlines are really concerned that they're not selling many flights, but the great thing is you lock into them and then the airline cannot just walk away. The crucial thing about air passenger rights rules is that if they cancel, they'll offer you a refund. Obviously, they'd much rather you took a refund, but you can just say, no, sorry, you need to get me an alternative flight. So can you sort it out, please?
That is not what I expected you to be telling me. Also, didn't know you were going to invite me to Mykonos. Thanks. I'll be there. Sounds great. Okay. But what is the EU playing at then to be saying this? I mean, we know there's probably going to be big delays at certain airports. Certain countries are sort of stepping away from having to do all the biometric screening because that's been brought into action as well, hasn't it, by the EU?
Yes, so this is an interesting thing that you and I have talked many times about the entry-exit system, which has been absolutely shambolic in some places since it was rolled out earlier this month, and so it's got to the stage where, well, if you go down to the Port of Dover or Eurotunnel terminal at Folkestone or St Pancras station in London, which have juxtaposed frontier controls, i.e. the French police aux frontières are actually doing the checks there, well, you've got all these really expensive machines standing there doing absolutely nothing, gathering dust because they can't get hooked up to the French IT system. So it's all a bit of a shambles, to the point where, and bear in mind, this is where we expected to give 4 fingerprints from our right hand and a facial biometric. The Italians have been allowing or enabling or forcing people to miss flights home, and the Greeks have just said, oh, are you British? We love the British. They're really important to our tourist trade. So if you're British, come over here. We won't do any of those nasty biometric things. We'll just let you in. Now, I need to say, that when you phone up Brussels and say, what do you think about this? They say, what? What are they doing? There is absolutely no legal basis whatsoever for this. But anyway, they're getting on with that. But meanwhile, there's lots of loose talk, Alex, from the EU Commissioner. Also, we've had the airlines, and they're trying to get their retaliation in first. So quite a lot of them, I think, would, even if they've got enough fuel, they'd probably like to cancel some flights which are going to be losing them money. And so they're saying, yeah, oh, look, if we have to cancel some flights, oh, terrible, but you can't take our slots away from us. So that would be if we last saw this in COVID, where if you're British Airways and you've got most of the slots at Heathrow, well, you're not going to, normally they're on a use them or lose them basis, but they won't be during this particular crisis. The airlines want air passenger duty to be scrapped. They want noise limits and closure of airports at night to be relaxed. So they've got a whole shopping list of things. And the motto in aviation is never waste a good crisis.
I think that's also the motto in Brussels a lot of the time, Simon. It's always great catching up with you. I'll see you in Mykonos, if not before. Thanks ever so much, the brilliant Simon Calder. Right, let's do some of your messages now. And by the way, coming up at 11 o'clock, a brilliant guest. I cannot wait to ask him all about Mandelson and about Lord Hermer. We're going to be joined by former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove. He'll be shining a little bit of light onto things, won't he? Let's see. Alex, you speak for me. Brilliant rant, says Lucy in Cornwall. Alex, you're brilliant. Thanks. Go. I'm going to have a big ego after all this. Starmer needs to be kicked out of office right now. He's unfit to govern and is destroying the country. Rob says, Alex, will you get off the fence for once, please? Yeah, Sarah saying she's so scared and angry as well. Agreed with every word I said about the terrible attack. Nothing like an Alex passionate rant to get the fires burning. Yeah, I think I almost blew a gasket in my head. Starmer and Hermer want to prosecute veterans. Why can't these poor victims of illegals prosecute the politicians? There must be a human rights lawyer out there able to do it. I genuinely think that, when it comes to this grooming gangs inquiry as well, I think people who turn a blind eye to this stuff, their heads need to roll. I'm sorry if you got away with such failures, such negligence in the private sector. You would have no golden handshake. You would have no pension. It would be get out now, pack your things and leave. And I don't understand, especially when it comes to something as important as women's safety. Where is the emergency debate in Parliament? Where is it? Alex, I'm a 16-year-old man. I called my grandchildren and they don't answer their phone. When I ask them about this, they say text because it's less stressful. Oh, yeah, we're talking about how I think this is like, breaking apart society because everyone's just pathetic and feckless and lives on instant gratification. We've got a nation of just babies. Well, I suppose it's because we've been infantilising people for God knows how many decades. But there you go. Right, I'm glad I got some of that off my chest. I'm very much looking forward to the next interview. Keep your thoughts coming in. 03444991000 on WhatsApp, 87222 on text. Right, talk. Before you send your message, don't go anywhere. Back after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show, and yet another day in the clown country that is the United Kingdom, it seems. Well, certainly a clown of a Prime Minister. Although, is he a clown? Is it just the fact that he's a bit politically naive, that he shows poor judgment? Or is there something deeper going on? Because I cannot at all wrap my head around why Mandelson. I wrote a piece about it on Substack. The minute that man was announced, I was like, well, that's crazy. Why would you put something like, how is that even possible? Someone who is sort of infamous for scandal being made an ambassador in the special relationship. Now, I'm just Joe Public. If as a punter I thought that was absolute lunacy from the get-go, the Prime Minister isn't that stupid. He's not so stupid as to think, well, you know, that's going to be okay. He's the best person for the job. So what possessed him? We've not had that question answered by him. He just said, well, it was poor judgment. Why? I mean, that is so catastrophically poor. I'm afraid I think there's something else going on here. What is going on with Lord Hermer? How the heck did this man, unelected, again, a political appointment, and he's now the highest legal office in the land, our Attorney General, and he spent his entire career representing the IRA, Shamima Begum, trying to prosecute our armed forces at the behest of terrorists connected to the IRGC. And this man is now the biggest lawyer in the land. How is this possible? And what is the connection with all of these things and the Chagos Islands? Because that was also crazy. Let's give that away to Mauritius. Oh, we have to, because, I don't know, hashtag reparations. Philip Sands was the lawyer behind that. He's a mate of Starmer and Hermer. And somewhere underneath all of this, there's a common denominator of China. What is going on? I know a man who might be able to answer that particular question. He's my favourite human being on planet Earth, Sir Richard Dealer, former head of MI6. Sir Richard, it is always an honour to have you on the programme. Let's start off with the Mandelson thing. I don't think the Prime Minister's stupid. I think he probably knew exactly what was going on when he appointed Mandelson as a fait accompli, announced it to the public before any of the vetting has happened. Do you think that I'm sort of being a little bit too harsh on him and I should sort of swallow his lines that it was just poor judgment?
No, you aren't being too harsh. Look, there's a very simple fact, is that you don't put someone in a post which requires a DV certificate who can't get one. So, just go back to basics. There are no ifs and buts and grey lines when it comes to the upper echelons and compartments of national security. And Mandelson couldn't, surprise, surprise, make the standard. So he just shouldn't. And Oliver Robbins should have just said, I refuse to agree the appointment, and put the onus on the Prime Minister or Lammy to overrule him. I've just written an article about this, which you've probably read. Don't overcomplicate it. Right from the word go, it was absolutely obvious anybody who knew anything about Mandelson's background, despite the fact he was sort of new Labour fixer, he wouldn't get a DV certificate.
Yeah, he wouldn't get a job in a local library, quite frankly, which just brings me right back to the question of why. Why Mandelson? Why did the Prime Minister expend so much political capital and risk on this appointment? This is where something in me is sort of nagging at me, that one of the things they wanted him in before inauguration, and one of the big ticket items that he was going to be responsible for was convincing Donald Trump that giving the Chagos Islands to Mauritius was a necessity, and the deal was a very good one. And it's this sort of judgment on China especially that just keeps coming up over and over again with this government. And then you look at the reasons, perhaps, why DLove may have failed vetting, and moreover, from it being Epstein, one imagines it's actually down to some of his former clients, including members of the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, if there's a basic problem, I think it's the confusion over international law. And we have a government that seems to be in the grip of international lawyers whose, as it were, interpretation is highly subjective. And many of us disagree with the line they take. And I mean, Herma's behavior in relation to that bent solicitor Schinner is just outrageous. And I think if you look at Herma's record, many of us would feel that he's unsuitable to hold public office because of his record. And, you know, what he's doing now in relation to Northern Ireland and this Northern Ireland bill and his sort of persecution of British soldiers who've been involved in a really complex and difficult conflict. It's out. I mean, I think most of us feel it's completely unacceptable. But Starmer is, you know, in a hole, and he's still digging hard. And he doesn't seems to be incapable of really drawing a line under these issues. And I mean, the government is going to suffer dreadfully in forthcoming elections.
And they deserve to, because from where I'm standing, politically appointing a man who's not elected to the highest legal office in the land, which one imagines he's read into a lot of highly classified information. When you look at his previous client list, I'm terrified by that. I'm assuming that because it's a sort of ministerial appointment, he doesn't have to undergo the sort of vetting that a civil service appointment would require, or has he had to, Lord Herma?
Well, I'm not sure of the procedure, but I think, you know, he's appointed to the position as he's a lawyer, and I don't know what the vetting rules are. I would have to look it up, so I'm not going to sort of put my opinions out on that particular issue, but I think just his record. But then, you know, we've got an administration that clearly believes very heavily in aspects of international law being applied across the board, which some of us feel very, very uncomfortable with. And I think this is completely wrong. And, you know, they'll suffer politically, so why the hell are they doing it?
I often wonder whether our own Prime Minister would pass vetting, quite frankly, given his own history of enjoying gap years in Soviet workers' camps and the like. And, you know, Mandelson as well, he was a member of the Communist Party for a period of time. And I kind of think to myself, Sir Richard, how is it that we spent most of last century helping America fight communism, terrified of it, and then the turn of the century fighting Islamism and terrorism? And now we actually have people with, you know, deeply strong connections to communist regimes and extreme left-wingers, and people who are, you know, the pro-Gaza lot are sitting on the green benches.
Well, the justification that they see is they were elected. And the trouble is that, you know, you can't vet the Prime Minister.
Do you think he'd pass it if he was vetted?
Well, he probably would in his case. You know, there are quite a few left-wing politicians who've got some pretty peculiar skeletons in their cupboard. I mean, the one that I really stood out against and went public on was Jeremy Corbyn, you know, before that election, in which in the end he did so badly. And I got lambasted by various Labour figures for doing so. But I mean, Corbyn could never, ever have got anywhere near having a DV certificate. I'm not going to make the same comment about Starmer. I think, you know, Starmer's problem is political judgment and, you know, doing successively stupid things, you know, which is amazing. You know, we have a deficit of good judgment in our Prime Minister, and actually some previous ones as well, and we need to put that right.
Does it concern you, the proximity of this current government with China? Because when I sort of totted up the amount of ministerial visits that have taken place since they took power, and then you look at other things, Chagos Islands, the mega embassy, Ed Miliband buying everything that they ever make when it comes to net zero and green infrastructure, it's a huge change, a huge turnaround from where I thought we were at as a country. And again, we've had a government that when they were asked, well, you know, do you want to help give evidence to prosecute some Chinese spies by saying China poses a threat to national security, they wouldn't do it. So are we supposed to be happy with China now, that they're no problem, nothing to see here? Or should we be deeply concerned that this government seems to be cozying up to Xi Jinping?
Well, we should be deeply concerned. And, you know, we're going to have a trading relationship with China, whatever, but we need to do that with our eyes wide open. And I'm pleased to say, I've been invited several times into the House of Commons to brief groups of Labour MPs who want to understand better the security problem of our relationship with China. So it's not as though, the whole of the Labour Party is in the wrong place. There are a lot of people in there who thoroughly understand the dangers of making economic dependencies on China in particular. We had the issue with Huawei. Thankfully, the government sort of stood up to that one. But I mean, now we've got the issue of like switching gear with Chinese cellular models in the grid. And I mean, people are waking up to that problem, and there are measures being taken behind the scenes to try to control it. But there are large chunks of the government who've been uncritical in their view of how we deal with China. And the issue, particularly that China isn't a threat to our national security after these various cases in Parliament, is completely ridiculous. Of course it's a threat. It's a major threat. And the DG of the Security Director General has stood up and said this publicly a number of times and says, China's a big problem for us. We've got to go into these relationships with our eyes wide open.
What about Iran? Because I'm personally quite shocked and appalled at initially the hesitancy to allow the US to use their own air bases. I'm personally quite supportive of the idea of preventing Iran from ever developing a nuclear weapon. So why? I don't understand. I mean, you, as someone who is the former head of MI6, why is it that Europe doesn't seem to have the same attitude as Trump when it comes to how close Iran might have been to creating intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads on?
Well, you state the problem. And be careful what you want. I mean, when I read and hear a lot of the European media on the war in Iran, it looks as though they want Iran to win. I mean, for goodness sake, understand what our basic national security priorities are and how we should view this problem. This is an ongoing problem which has been there for 30 years. I retired in 2004. What was our primary intelligence requirement back then? It was Iran nuclear. And the problem's been building up. Okay, we may, in some respects, disagree with the way that Netanyahu and Trump have brought it to a head, but they have, and it's clear where our interests lie, and we need to choose, which position we take. And it's strongly in the interests of Europe and the UK in particular that we see the end of the Iranian regime. And I think a lot of people seem to misunderstand the conflict, this latest 3-week ceasefire. Look, this is conflict by negotiation, and Trump hasn't blinked. I think that their policy is to try to take down the Iranian regime economically. And that's what's happening in the Straits of Hormuz. And people need to understand and think clearly about this.
Do you think part of the reason why Europe was so against at least being publicly seen to be involved, because they seem to go out of their way to keep reaffirming in public statements, not just in the United Kingdom, but countries such as France as well, we're not part of this, we're not doing any of this? Is it because they're terrified about Islamists in our countries that might rise up and take to the streets or retaliate? We've already seen a number of potentially IRGC-linked attacks in the United Kingdom. Should we dare to believe that actually a sort of fifth column of terror cells are having an impact on our foreign policy?
Well, quite frankly, I think in the case of the UK, it's international lawyers again, the left wing of the Labour Party, and Starmer's position in Parliament, which is probably the problem. And of course, they reversed it within 24 hours, making this sophistry in terms of a distinction between offence and defence. But I think there are there are problems in France, let's say, which are worse than in the UK, with the massive size of the Islamic diaspora and the internal problems that they have in certain French cities. So, I mean, you can see that the pressures that operate on various European governments, but I think we all should have been clear-cut. You can not join the conflict, but you can respect your international alliances and make sure that you support the Americans logistically. And that's what we should have and could have done. And, the outlier in all of this in Europe actually is Spain, who's behaved, in my view, appallingly. I was recently in Madrid. talking at various public events in Madrid a few days ago, and there are lots of Spaniards who totally disagree with the policy of Pedro Sanchez.
Pedro Sanchez, I think, is, posed a major risk to a lot of Europe by randomly giving 500,000 unknowns the right to live in Spain, because under Schengen they can pretty much go anywhere. And it connects to this horrific story today, yet another attack by a so-called asylum seeker on an innocent young woman, a gang rape. And this man apparently was wanted for murder in Egypt, which is clearly why he fled Egypt. But then he seems to have said on his asylum application, yes, I'm fleeing Egypt because I'm wanted for murder, but it was my brother who did it. The Home Office has insisted that all asylum claimants undergo mandatory security checks to establish their identity and check their records against international crime data. A source said those checks had taken place in this case. This isn't the first time a criminal from Egypt has been put up in a hotel. There was another one who was wanted in Egypt, I think, for connections to the Muslim Brotherhood. No, a bomb plot, that was it. He was wanting to make bombs and carry out terror attacks in Egypt. Suddenly finds himself living over in Ealing, raping someone in Hyde Park. I mean, how at risk are we from God knows who getting on these boats when they're actually saying I'm wanted for murder, and they're still put in hotels where they can go, leave, do what they want with whoever they want with no eyes on?
Well, I think the issue is pretty clear cut. We are confined in what we can do by our membership of ECHR, and I personally have the view that we should leave it. The common law, as it's written in the UK, is perfectly adequate for dealing with these problems, and we do not need to be beholden to ECHR, which is largely, as it were, delivering judicial decisions which democratically the British people cannot change or cannot affect. And I think, I think many of us feel this has gone far too far. It's absurd. We need a fundamental shift. Once again, we're back in the hands of lawyers and international lawyers, and I think the majority of this country is now seriously in disagreement with this type of thinking.
Oh, you're always so pragmatic and polite, Sir Richard. It's a real honour to welcome you back on the show. Now, because I've been laying into my favourite, Lord Hermer, I suppose we better put forward his side of the story. A spokesman for the Attorney General said Lord Hermer did a small amount of work at the start of this case. This is the Al-Swedi case, where he was going after prosecutions for UK soldiers in Iraq, where he made clear that serious allegations at the time needed further investigation. The attorney argued it would be unfair on armed services personnel if they didn't have the opportunity to show their innocence through a proper investigation. The Attorney General had minimal involvement in the Al-Swedi claims, limited to a small number of hours between 2008 and 2013. As soon as the Solicitors Regulation Authority case was brought forward, the Attorney General was clear in his condemnation for the reprehensible behaviour of Mr Shiner that rightly led to him being disqualified and successfully prosecuted. All right, I won't comment. OK, we're going to be taking a short break, and then after that we're going to be digging around in this megapole, which is looking increasingly like where politics is shattered, fractured, splintered beyond the two legacy parties into an array of things on the left and the right that, well, people are probably going to have to club together and work together if they're going to form a majority. We're going to be catching up with the brilliant polling expert and Professor of Politics, Sir John Curtis, just after this.
I hope I wouldn't have used that. Well, certainly I don't remember trying to get any job for my mates.
Can you get a job? Can you help get a job for ex's mates? But don't tell the Foreign Secretary.
I don't think it's completely surprising that the Prime Minister would be so sensitive about the way in which he was dealing with a member of his senior team, and particularly a Director of Communications who's in minute-by-minute contact with the media, that he would want that kept to a very, very tight group of people at the time.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
You know, something strange is happening politically, not just in the United Kingdom, but across most of Western Europe. Even, I think, sort of in parts of America, you can see, I mean, you've still got the Republicans and the Democrats, but you've got MAGA Republicans and then the other ones. But something seems to be happening in the West where the legacy parties are losing ground, they're losing support. And many of the issues, I think, behind why they're losing support, we share with our brethren in countries such as the Netherlands and Germany and France, where populist parties are on the rise, both on the left and on the right. Representing, some might say, a more spicy version of left-wingism and right-wingism than the legacy parties ever did. So what is going on here? And also, now we have this massive mega poll, which is suggesting that Reform would need to join with the Conservatives to govern or risk handing power to a sort of alliance of the left. Is that likely to happen, or is there still a way under first past the post? We're a long way off a general election, of course, where we could see Reform get a majority. Well, let's speak to Sir John Curtis, polling expert and professor of politics. Sir John, I mean, this isn't sort of new information. We've been seeing the polling go in this direction for quite a while. But what is the landscape like in Britain? Are we now sort of forever fated to have to create coalitions? Because we've been in this situation before when people said, well, the Tories can never win an outright majority because of UKIP or the Brexit Party, etc. And yet they have in previous occasions.
Yes, I mean, I think first thing one has to say is that one of the lessons of the last Parliament is that don't attempt to forecast the outcome of the next election on the basis of what the polls are saying in the first 2 years of that Parliament. You know, remember, the Conservatives were never behind in the polls until December 2021, and then along came Partygate, and the rest is history. But what is true is that at present, according to the opinion polls, and this is reflected in the mega poll from Electoral Calculus to which you've referred, our politics are more fragmented than they ever have been. I mean, the polls between them suggest that at the bottom of the pile are the Democrats, but they've still got 12% of the vote. And at the top of the pile are Reform, but they now have no more than 26%. And in effect, what today's poll, or the poll from Electoral Calculus is pointing out, is that whereas when Reform were running at 31% of the vote, then you could conceive of the possibility of them getting an overall majority. Now that it's slipped down to 26, and I think in the Electoral Calculus poll it's actually running at about 24, that frankly just becomes too difficult. But basically everybody is squeezed within a very narrow range, and therefore inevitably, even with the first past the post system, it's unlikely that anybody's going to get an overall majority. Now, whether or not this is permanent or not, I mean, I think in a sense this is where the elections on May the 7th may play a role. Parties are, there's nothing inevitable about Reform staying at 27%. The question is, will they disappear in some sense between now and 2029? There's nothing inevitable about the Greens remaining at around 16%, but the question is, will they disappear at some point between now and 2029? And I think what one needs to understand there is that parties are more likely to survive if they create an organizational base up and down the country, that there is always somebody willing to help that party out, try to ensure their local government candidates, so that even when things go down, the party survives, and then it may come back when fortune returns. Look at how the Liberal Democrats have managed to survive across all of these years, including the disaster of the coalition. And the point about the elections on May the 7th is that, we already seen Reform fighting virtually every single one of the 5,000 seats that are up for grabs. The Greens not being far off. That in itself is a demonstration that they are now creating an organisational base across the country. And secondly, if indeed, it seems inevitable, both those parties do win a significant number of councillors, who are your best local activists? It's local councillors. So the truth is, therefore, although, yes, we can't forecast what's going to happen in 2029, the probability that the Greens and Reform will at least be significant players is, I think, undoubtedly going to look relatively strong by 2029. And that, therefore, yes, the prospect that we will end up with a hung parliament, i.e. no party with an overall majority, will inevitably increase as a result.
Why is that Reform vote slipping? Where are those votes going? Are these people, because, depending on where you sort of get your information, on one hand, you look at a lot of people on X who seem to think Reform aren't being hardline enough. But on the other hand, you wonder if some of these votes are going back to the Conservatives. What is your read on that? Why have they because they were sort of doing very well in the polls for a significant period of time, and it's more recently that they seem to have taken a dip?
Yeah, actually, you can date it. It was slipping a bit from the very high point of last September, but it was still running at 29% in February. It began to dip in March. That points to theory number one, though frankly it's impossible to prove or disprove, that Donald Trump's unpopular bombing of Iran reflected badly on Reform because of Nigel Farage's relatively close association with the American president. As I say, I don't think there's any evidence for or against that proposition, but certainly the timeline fits. Second possibility is that during the middle of winter, there have inevitably been fewer people crossing the channel. Therefore, immigration has been somewhat less prominent in the polls. The third, which again, there's a bit of polling evidence for, is that maybe some people, now that Rupert Lowe has created his alternative Restore Britain party, that some of support for Reform has wandered in that direction. Otherwise, however, what I think is also clear is that actually the level of loss that both Labour and the Conservatives have been losing to Reform has indeed been somewhat lower than was the case a few months ago. So I think plenty of speculation. I don't think anybody can give you a definitive answer to what is a perfectly reasonable question.
When it comes to the Conservative Party and Reform, when I look at things, as you know, John, I've sort of been involved in politics myself for a very long time. Sure. When I look at constituencies, I sometimes wonder that they're not necessarily fighting over the same turf, that Reform have the ability to take old Labour seats that the Tories never really get a look into. Meanwhile, the Tories seem to, be contesting more increasingly against the Liberal Democrats in the sort of leafy shires and within polite Britain. So perhaps the idea of doing some sort of pre-election pact isn't even necessary.
Well, except that it is still true that the vast bulk of people who are supporting Reform are people who have hitherto supported the Conservatives. Again, and not least because essentially what has happened is that Reform have taken away from the Conservatives the coalition of people who voted for Boris Johnson in 2019 to get Brexit done. Support for the Conservatives now is barely any higher amongst those who voted Leave than it is amongst those who voted Remain, whereas support for Reform is running just under 50% amongst Leave voters, and it's less than 10% amongst Remain voters. So you put together what's happened between 2019 and 2024, and then since 2024, it's still Reform who are primarily challenging Conservatives in terms of votes, in the same way that it is primarily the Greens who are now primarily challenging Labour in terms of votes. What, however, of course, is true is that by taking votes away from the Tories and then taking some support away from Labour, while at the same time Labour lose support to the Greens, it is indeed possible for Reform to win seats that perhaps the Conservatives never could take from Labour. And equally, what is certainly also true, however, is that the places where Reform tend to be weakest are indeed those places where the Democrats tend to be relatively strong. And that does mean that the Conservatives, in a sense, are better able to challenge the Liberal Democrats than Reform are able to do. But I think at the moment, given the very heavy... the first point to make is that given the fact that, frankly, Reform and Conservatives are fighting over the same territory, they're not going to come in agreement anytime soon, because both of them will want to strengthen their position within that territory. And of course, what this poll, of course, it can be read as saying, well, they don't need to actually form a deal before the election. The question is, would they be willing to come to some understanding after an election? Now, whether or not Conservative MPs would or not be willing to contemplate that after a 2029 election, well, that would be something that would be very interesting to behold and see what happens.
It will indeed, but a long way still to go. So, John Curtis, thank you ever so much. Always a privilege having the elections guru on this programme. OK, right, let us take a short break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Guy Dampier, Senior Researcher on Nationhood at the Prosperity Institute, about, well, I mean, there's just so many stories now about migrants coming over, raping women, harassing children. There's 2 in today's papers alone. We're losing our minds as a country, I'm telling you. We're discussing it after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back. More delightful news, as you're probably already aware today, of yet another sex attack of a young woman by not just one, not 2, a whole load of asylum seekers who filmed it, bragged about it, all got involved. Oh, don't worry, it's not rape, it's just a bit of sex. That's the way they see things in their country. We need to get real about this. We also need to get real about this ridiculous story where there's a beautiful, lovely, leafy Surrey village. Here we go, just rifling through my papers finding this one, where a grim migrant has been lurking around outside the gates of a primary school. He was arrested just weeks after he'd been moved into Laleham, which is a cute little place in Surrey. He's moved there in secret after repeatedly appearing outside the school. And police were called. Parents challenged the man. Wouldn't you? If someone was like loitering around, harassing your blimmin' wee little daughter. He's in his early 20s. Oh, guess what? He's got mental health issues. Of course he does. I just call him a pervert, quite frankly. They claimed he'd been monitoring children outside the Laleham Church of England primary school. Anyway, parents decided that they didn't want this to happen. Of course, they questioned the Afghan national over his behaviour. He said he had paid for the right to do so. He said he paid £3,000 to get here. He became abusive. He said, I'm allowed to stand where I want. And then he said, I live here. I'm relaxing. And he was hanging around outside the school the whole time. He'd be there when it was pick up and drop off time, leaning against the wall, standing in the same place. He was aggressive when people spoke to him, especially if you were a woman. He'd react angrily and be abusive. And he started spitting on people. I mean, can we just be honest, right? That certain men from certain countries are just animals. that they're nothing to do with our culture. They hate women. They're misogynist. And I don't care about this. Like, he's got mental health issues. No, he's just some sort of backwards feral pervert from a country that hates women. It's not mental health issues. Let's speak now to Guy Dampier, senior researcher on nationhood at the Prosperity Institute. I don't know where to begin with all of this. Again, the same conversations. Again, people like me screaming at the top of their lungs. These men should not be in this country. In the same way you don't let a wolf into, you know, a sheep pen, you don't let a feral goat herd from Afghanistan who seems to think flashing an ankle warrants rape or stoning to death to come and lurk around outside primary schools, for crying out loud. And yet, despite this happening repeatedly, it seems they wander in and out of hotels. Doesn't matter if they've murdered someone. Nah, you get to stay there. Go around the world as you please. Do as you see fit. Despite warnings, despite an arrest, despite parents saying he's sniffing around our kids, still nothing's done. Still, this government aren't taking it seriously. And quite frankly, given what happened in Epsom when a girl said that she had been gang raped, and apparently that actually did not come to pass, and yet people went out on the streets in their masses to protest. We're probably a hair's breadth away from some really serious insurrection, would be my prediction. What do you reckon, Guy?
I think, unfortunately, it's likely to be true. We have still got lots of small boat migrants coming over. A significant enough percentage of those seem to have extremely regressive views about women, and a chunk of those are willing to attack women and girls. It means, I think there's a pretty high chance that there's going to be some attacks this summer, that British women and girls are going to be victimised. And if you get one of those cases, which really makes the media, which has some particularly horrific detail, which sticks in people's minds, people will not, unsurprisingly, come out and protest about it. They don't want this.
Well, what worries me, though, is when you read the details of what happened in Brighton, it has exactly the sort of details that you're talking about. I mean, these animals, this one 20-year-old and two other boat migrants, they spat on the woman, they kicked her, they dragged her onto the beach, they filmed it, they took it in turns to aggressively rape her, they were laughing the whole time they were doing it, they grabbed her throat, she was pinned down, they were celebrating their horrific crime, showing the video around the blimmin' asylum hotel, joking and getting ready together just before the attack. Clearly they'd sat and planned it all together and then bragging to their mates about it, then went home and had a blimmin' barbecue. I mean, I cannot understand why. How many more of these things need to happen? But it's almost like we're becoming normalised to it. Do you know what I mean? Like, this kind of happens when you get war fatigue, that, you know, the first few weeks of watching explosions in a distant country is like, oh, my goodness, that's horrific. Then after a while, you just go, eh. And it's a bit like every time you learn some child's been stabbed by a yobbo on a Lime bike, and you're just like, eh, that's normal now. My worry, actually, is because our politicians aren't taking this seriously, we're kind of becoming accustomed to it.
I think, unfortunately, that's true. People do get used to things when they keep on happening. We've now had these small boats coming over since 2018, so we're now 8 years into it. We've had significant numbers coming for several of those. We've had a vile series of rapes, sexual assaults, murders, attacks, drug dealing, stealing, all sorts of things associated with this. And we've moved beyond the novelty phase to a point where, as you say, it almost has to be a case like this, which is especially horrific to get picked up on. And it's going to have very unfortunate effects. I mean, this particular lady, she was coming back from a night out. That is repeatedly an MO that you see over and over again. Mm-hmm. They find a woman, she's been out, they either get her away from her friends or they wait until she's away from her friends. She's had something to drink. She's maybe not sure what's going on, or she's afraid because she's quite often outnumbered, or at least they're bigger and scarier than her. And then they attack. And so for a lot of women, I'm sure in these places, you know, they've moved these people all over the country. A lot of places that you go, your nightlife is now something where you have to very seriously consider the possibility of being attacked when you go on a night out. You have to consider whether you have to go around with friends, whether you need people to pick you up, whether you need to have some form of protection.
See, my concern is, you know, when you talk about their MO here loitering around, you know, for drunk women to pounce upon, that'd be the MO in their home countries. That's the point, isn't it? These men are brought up to think that way. You can't just brainwash people. They don't land on the shores of Brighton and suddenly go, you know, I'm part of the Me Too movement now. They've been drugged up, brainwashed on pornography, which largely depicts Western women in, you know, pretty horrific portrayals. They think, therefore, we're cheap, we're nasty, that they can do what they want with us, probably that we deserve it. And I genuinely wonder, Guy, and I don't know whether they're, you know, what your view on this is, but I do wonder whether a number of these migrants aren't coming over necessarily for the cash money, although that's a huge attraction, a huge draw, that they're actually at this point coming over to do exactly this. Because some of the videos that are placed on social media by the people traffickers saying, yeah, come and get in my boat, actually show scantily clad women, show pictures of Bournemouth Beach, which now seems to be the gauntlet of rape. I mean, I don't know what you think about that, but I'm beginning to suggest that the motivation for these young men is exactly to come and sexually abuse women.
Well, as you say, there have been videos that have been used by smugglers and by others advertising this. So I think it's pretty clear that although there are a variety of reasons they're coming, including to work illegally, access to the welfare system, better life, it also includes access to women. They think easy women. And obviously there's a very strong cultural barrier for a lot of these people. Their view is that women that drink, women that go out, women that are alone, women that are willing to have sex before marriage, any of these things that would be considered relatively normal here, put them in their minds in a position where you can do what you want to them and it does not matter.
And yet the government's response to this and local authority response seems to be doing everything secretively, you know, moving these guys into HMOs and not telling anyone, doing it under the cover of darkness, you know, lest anyone finds out and complains about it. Or even worse, I've seen some suggestions of educating primary-aged girls to be careful of these men, or even encouraging local women to carry panic alarms. Why don't they just lock the blimmin' men up? Why are they allowed out these hotels?
Well, that's the problem. I mean, even in the case of the rape in Brighton, one of those men absconded and had to be found later. So fundamentally, the problem is the international law framework that we're operating in. Human rights law means that you can't do pushbacks. You are limited in how easily you can deport people. You have to have a lengthy process taking them through. You can't just detain them arbitrarily. So you have all these legal problems that basically mean that the local authorities and the government are, to a degree, doing the best they can within the operating framework they have. But of course, they do have the ability to change that framework, and that's on the government. The government fundamentally does not want to change the legal framework in which they're operating on. And until they do that, we will continue to see dangerous men coming into the country and being able to prey on innocent women and girls.
Guy, I don't know anymore. As a woman in this country, I just hate the fact we've got as our Prime Minister what appears to be some sort of rape enabler when it comes to these policies. Guy Dampier, thank you ever so much. Senior researcher on nationhood at the Prosperity Institute. Where is the urgent government debate? Huh? Where was the question at PMQs? Although there was the MP, actually, for Surrey, who pointed towards this harassment at the local primary school. He did bring it up. And do you know what Starmer said? Yes, we're looking into it. Listen, Sir Keir, if you have one iota of morality, empathy or compassion, or even a tiny little shred of you that gives a hoot about the dignity and the safety of women, do the right thing. Don't let these men wander around. I mean, they shouldn't be in the country anyway, for crying out loud, but you ain't going to do anything about that, are you? But do you know what you could do? Quite quickly and immediately, you could call an emergency debate in the Commons. You could find the legislation, Mr. I'm the expert in international blimmin' law. You know where to look. You know which sentences need to be repealed or deleted, don't you? That's your blimmin' expertise. So why aren't you doing it? Why aren't you looking at the legislation that you seem to think means that these men get put up in 4-star hotels and then can wander around raping whoever they like? No, they shouldn't be allowed off site. We don't know who they are. They lie about who they are. They've broken in illegally. They come from misogynistic cultures, countries with oodles of terrorism as well. And you're happy for them just to, I don't know, pootle about the place? I mean, what is going on? You You, my friend, have the power to do something about this. It's supposed to be your expertise. So get into Parliament right now, call a debate, consider everything that needs to be done, because this is a national emergency. And if you do nothing, my friend, if you persist on giving these men the benefits that they're getting, the freedoms that they're not entitled to, the benefit of the doubt that they do not deserve when they've thrown away their paperwork and broken into the country, if you continue to appease them, my friend, then you are, quite frankly, a rape enabler, because that is what they're doing. And that's on you, son. That is on you. I don't know how many more rants I can have today. I'm going to need a stiff one after this. Right, how about you have a rant? It's your turn now, before I sort of, I don't know, pass out from the anger. 03444 99 1000 is the number to call. It's your normal network rate, so you can rant for free. You could also send me a WhatsApp message on that number, or leave a little ranty voice note. Let's have a rant off. 87222 is the number if you'd like to send a text message. If you're going to do that, write the word talk before you send your message. OK, I'll speak to some of you just after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Got some good messages coming in. Thanks to these HMOs, women won't just be targeted outside nightclubs. It could be your next door neighbours dragging you through your garden fence. Yeah, seriously. I was followed home. I mean, I know people seem to think this didn't happen. It did. When I used to live in London, I was followed home all the way to my front door by an Afghan. Pretty sure it was an Afghan because he had that funny hat on that looks like a sort of inverted flour sack. And it was only thanks to the quick thinking of my next door neighbour's son who let me into his house and then stood guard. And do you know how long that creepy man stood outside waiting for me to come out that house? Half an hour he was still there. Now, if I had gone into my own house, what is the betting? He might have knocked the door. I could have opened it. I lived at the bottom of a cul-de-sac. He could have pushed his way in. It's not funny. Women's lives are seriously at risk. Alex, I live in a small town. I wrote to my MP as I saw these men outside my child's nursery primary school taking pictures and lurking on bikes. I was fobbed off. I asked if there were HMOs in the town. They said some vulnerable people were given housing. Vulnerable. I later saw a couple of these men in the post office being vile to the people behind the counter, shouting in another language. I can't take my child to the park. I dare not go out without a man. We're becoming more like Iran every day. Yep. My grandchildren are at that church school in Laleham. I feel like patrolling outside all day, says Dawn. I would if I were you. Good morning, Alex. I may be mad. I may be paranoid, but maybe all the government madness is a planned diversion tactic. While everyone is looking at the Mandy Gate and misleading the House, they're busy pushing through some socialist dark plans for who knows what. Acting a fool and causing drama is always a good way to throw off your enemy and keep them guessing. Do you know what? I actually don't agree with that, because the reason I don't agree with it is because Starmer don't care. The man is so arrogant, he does all these mad socialist things in plain sight. He'll just do it. He's got a majority, he doesn't care. He will visibly, in front of everybody, you know, tear this country into wreck and ruin because he knows he can do it and he wants to. Arrogant man. Right, let's speak to Robert in Hertfordshire. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Alex. First, before I go, I've got 2 quick points to make, but before that, I just want to congratulate you on your earlier rant. That is your best. That puts your Sadiq Khan rant into the shade. That was absolutely incredible. Okay. 2 points regarding if Keir Starmer resigns, an automatic general election, and that should be law now. And the same as if a politician defects from one party to the next, an automatic by-election. Okay, my main point is I've got a quick fix for this. When the migrants come over, they've got the only words they've got on their lips are "I'm claiming asylum." What, for 12 months, there shouldn't be any asylum. For any reason, we should suspend political asylum for everyone. Unfortunately, there's going to be a few cases, you know, that's going to, but don't matter. We've got to get hard. If we suspend political asylum, they've got no reason to come over here. So, in other words...
Do you know, I agree with you, because other countries, I think Poland, was it Poland who turned around and said, sorry, fool, we're not going to have any more asylum seekers? And if you turn around as a country and just say that no, we're not having them. Sorry, we've done enough, not for us anymore, then go choose another country to go claim asylum in. I don't know why we've not done it. I mean, I do know, because the government loves blimmin' asylum seekers, apparently, and loves international law. But we could. There are countries in the EU who are actually signatories of the ECHR who have done exactly that. So there you go.
Yeah,
it's a lack of political will.
Soon, you know, very, very soon, because this, you know, nothing will happen under this government, regardless what your political sway is. You know, we need to have a change of government. And what's going to happen? The British people are going to take the law into their own hands. You can see it. It's bubbling under. You know, I've got some friends who've got not dodgy dealings, but I know people, naughty people who have had enough. And what we've got, but I've got a feeling that's what the sinister plan is. You know, it's Marxism. It's divide and conquer. And that's what I feel. And I feel the connection between Starmer and Mandelson is very sinister.
Oh, there's a lot of sinister things going on. There really is. And I think that, yeah, we've got to sort of dig into that a bit more. I wonder if that's where the Telegraph are at now, because I was just saying to my producer, Ted, during the advert, we've been banging on about Herma for ages, Ted and I, and just saying, well, how has it taken so long for anybody else to get onto this story? The man was a direct political appointment. We could all see his back catalogue of clients. Jerry Adams, Shamima Begum, the devil himself, no doubt. I don't understand why the media's just not even looked into this yet, but I'm glad the Telegraph is, and I just wonder if there's going to be more to come. I hope so. Robert, thank you for your call. Let's speak to Davy in Edinburgh. Hello, Davy.
Hi, Alex. The rapists, asylum seekers, animals, there's going to be nothing done about this until politicians are held personally accountable. By that, I mean, whoever the current Prime Minister of the day will be and the Home Secretary, maybe somebody with deep pockets could take out a class action on behalf of these women and take the politicians to court because they are aiding, abetting and enabling rape, murder in this country.
I mean, I've got to the stage now that I think every single sound-minded, sane woman in Britain should take to the streets and just peacefully say, end now. This has got to stop. You know, I think we all have to become suffragettes again, frankly, because they're not listening.
If a Prime Minister or a Home Secretary was held, and politicians now find, oh, I'm actually accountable for this, I could be jailed, I could be murdered, it would stop. It would soon find the will to stop it.
Well, that's it. I tend to agree. But I think we're just being, I don't know, we're not really a nation that is given to protesting. And this is why Starmer was so evil and calculating. Well, actually, Hermer was so evil and calculating early on after Southport to throw a load of people into prison for either turning out on demonstrations or for writing things on social media and televise all those trials. They knew what they were doing. Evil. Yeah. Right, let's speak now to Sandra in Essex. Thank you, by the way, Davey in Edinburgh. Let's squeeze in Sandra, who is in Essex. Hi, Sandra.
Hello, hi, Alex.
Hello, my love. What's on your mind?
Well, obviously, just coming back to you on your last speaking. Totally agree with you 100%. I live in Essex. The word on the street from people is exactly the same. The doctor's surgery, the supermarket, sitting in Marks and Spencer's restaurant yesterday, everybody's having the same conversations, how worried and they concerned for their own safety, especially the elderly people. They are very worried because they feel so vulnerable. They're frightened to go out. We won't even go into the towns anymore, some of the elderly people, because they know these men are hanging around on street corners. Yeah. They may not be doing anything, but it's the intimidation. Yeah. That's the problem. It is very intimidating, walking past a group of 6 men all speaking a foreign language and glaring at you. I had it the other day myself. I'm staying in London this week, and I went into a local Sainsbury's and I wanted to go and pay for... I can't remember what I was buying, something insignificant. And there were about 4 or 5 men who, you know, tracksuits and looked East African. I'd say sort of maybe Eritrean, Sudanese, I don't know. And they were all sort of loitering around outside the Sainsbury's, and they'd sent someone in to go and buy cigarettes. And it wasn't one of them. I don't know what the connection of this guy to them was. And I found myself sort of hanging back. I wanted them to go. I didn't want to leave the shop at the same time as them. I think I was buying a bottle of wine or something and walk down the street because I felt terrified. I felt really scared. And this is my blimmin' country and my capital city. I'm a grown woman. Why am I scared to leave a shop? It's ridiculous. Sandra, we've got to become suffragettes. That's the only choice we're left with at this stage. Sandra, keep safe. Keep your kids safe. Thank you ever so much for your call. Right, we're going to be taking a short break, but don't go anywhere because we're going to fire up some political chit-chat with the brilliant Ben Habib just after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
All right, how are you? I am so sick to death of this stupid, boneheaded freak we've got running the country. Because I got a little bit of breaking news. We're going to dig into that in just a moment. We're also going to talk about, well, the rapists that we're letting into our country. Also going to talk about this big interview that Nigel Farage has done in the Daily Mail, saying, I'll wage war on the benefits culture. He thinks that those going to work and those not going to work is one of the biggest divisions in society today. And we're also going to talk about Gibraltar's chief minister, who seems to be a fan of rejoining the EU. Jog on, son. And we're going to talk about all of this with the excellent Ben Habib, leader of Advance UK. Hello, good afternoon, Ben.
Good afternoon, Alex.
Now, let us start off, first of all, with a statement from Sir Keir Starmer. It was from his spokesman, because it's emerged that Donald Trump over in America is looking at, or there's been a leaked email from the Pentagon, apparently, according to a source from the US, which is sort of looking at punishing Europe for being so obstructive when it came to America launching those attacks on Iranian weapons manufacturing sites. A lot of countries not only said to America, you can't use your air bases here, also said you can't fly over our airspace. It's just absolutely perverse. Anyway, in response to this, I think Donald Trump rightly doesn't particularly like many countries in Europe and is looking at ways to threaten them, to get them back into line, to keep them in check. And when it comes to Britain, he's suggested that the Falkland Islands are something that he might find he doesn't want to support anymore. Did if his mate Javier Milei in Argentina, the libertarian president, decides that Argentina wants Las Malvinas back, well, Trump wouldn't stand in his way. So here's what Sir Keir Starmer's spokesman has said in response. Wait for this one, Ben. You're going to love the hypocrisy and the irony of it. We could not be clearer about the UK's position on the Falkland Islands. It's long-standing. It's unchanged. OK. Sovereignty rests with the UK. Huh? Says the person trying to give away all our power back to Brussels. And the island's right to self-determination is paramount. That's been our consistent position and will remain the case. Now, this is the bit that's going to make your glasses fall off your face. The PM has been clear repeatedly that he won't be pressured. He will always take a strong position on the UK's national interests. And with the Falklands, it's no different to that. Says the man who wanted to give away the Chagos Islands. Says the man who wants to drag us back into the EU. Says the man who bows down at the altar and wears a special Hessian sack and self-flagellates in front of international law every morning. He's probably got some sort of picture, some shrine to all the famous global socialists that he licks the photographs of. I don't know. Like, just... Oh.
Well, I mean, I do hope that Trump doesn't make that threat, because he might find he's pushing against an open door with Keir Starmer. As you rightly pointed out, Keir Starmer is actually not what I would describe as a British nationalist. He is firmly of the globalist disposition. Handing over Chagos, you forgot to mention Gibraltar, if I could just bring that back into the equation. You know, which we won in 1713, granted to us under the after the Spanish War of Succession, in perpetuity by the Spanish. It's literally been handed over back to the European Union. Remember, this is a bit of land, 2.3 square miles, without which we wouldn't have won the Napoleonic Wars, without which our efforts in World War I would have been much more challenged. World War II, it played a pivotal role, and even in this latest war against Iran. If HMS Dragon had found itself in Gibraltar rather than in some dockyard being refitted in the United Kingdom, it would have made it to Cyprus in what you might regard as a respectable period of time. Gibraltar's been handed over. And what I fear, that the mistake that Trump might be making is thinking that, well, you know, the British government would fear losing some of its territory, so let's push at that. But the reality, as you pointed out, Alex, is he'd be pushing in an open door and someone will say, well, take it. And even if Starmer, even if he's somehow developed the will to protect the Falklands, what's he going to protect it with?
Yeah.
In 1982, we were able to dispatch 115,000 troops to Falklands. We couldn't, our entire armed forces now numbers 75,000. We couldn't muster what's required to be done. This is how hollowed out the United Kingdom has become. So instead of taking positions which put us at odds with the most powerful country in the world, a country that actually traditionally loves us. And I know that Trump is particularly fond of the UK. Instead of taking positions which puts us at odds with them and therefore is damaging to our national interest, Starmer needs to start making friends with Trump.
He really does. I don't think that ship has sailed. I can't imagine Trump ever liking Starmer again, ever. He was a fool to like the man in the first place. But I do think that at least he's an Anglophile and so has our country's best interests at heart. Let's talk now about this big interview that Nigel Farage has done with the Mail. It's sort of very broad ranging and all sorts of things. But the biggest headline they've gone for is Nigel saying he's going to wage a war against benefits culture. Let's look into some of the detail of this, because what he's talking about is getting rid of PIP payments for people who have certain mental health cases or claim to have certain mental health issues. He's talking about stripping foreigners of the rights to access benefits and basically saying we've got to get real, whether it leads to protests, whether it leads to riots. We cannot go on. It's unsustainable. He's also gotten rid of lifting the cap on the 2-child benefits. I really don't get why he did that in the first place. I think it was just such an unreformy policy. It was sort of like weird. But basically, he says that this is probably one of the biggest issues facing this country. Do you think he's going to be able to do it?
I don't know if he's going to be able to do it. The proof of the pudding will be in the eating, but it is absolutely the right attitude. Our welfare bill is now £350 billion a year. That is 35% of our entire budget. When you add that to the NHS, which is at about 250, 60% of our budget is going on what I would regard as a spending which does not grow the economy, does not provide for prosperity of the United Kingdom, does not provide for the security of the United Kingdom. The only way we're going to be able to start doing what this country so desperately needs to be done in its national interests is if we start relearning the lesson that actually if you don't work, if you habitually avoid work, if you're a non-worker and you stand against work, you will not be rewarded. And let's just look at the numbers. People keep saying unemployment is actually manageable at about 1.5% or whatever. 1.5 million. 1.5 million. Yes, unemployment has been pretty steady at around 1.5 million, but unemployment figures do not measure the number of people who've given up looking for a job. There are now 4 million people in this country who are not even looking for a job, who don't show up in the unemployment statistics. Then there are another 2.5 million people who are actually working but surviving on universal credit because our economy is so badly damaged. And then, of course, you have the unemployed who are not working and also surviving on universal credit. We have around 8 million people all told not working in the United Kingdom or working to an extent but unable to make ends meet. The welfare bill has to be tackled, and it has to be tackled hard. That does not mean being unkind to people when they first lose their job, need a bit of support, need to get back on their feet. But it does mean saying, if you've been unemployed for more than 12 months, I'm sorry, buddy, pull your finger out and go and get a job. We've got to learn some tough love. Yeah. Dependency has become part of our national culture. It was never that way. We were an aspirational nature. We had an aspirational nature as a country. We used to want to go out and do stuff. And one of the things I do believe Farage and I absolutely see eye to eye on is because we spent our formative years in the same decade. It was the 1980s Thatcherite period, where we were all encouraged and given the tools by which we could improve our lot. So I actually do believe that Nigel Farage does want to tackle welfare. He knows firsthand, out of his own life experiences, that the welfare state's got too big. It needs to be pared back. And the only way we're going to be able to cut taxes on the working class and the middle classes and businesses, the engine of British economy, is if we cut welfare so we can afford to cut the taxes. If we want this country back on its feet again, that welfare bill has to be tackled hard.
What about some of the other things he's talking about in this interview? Let's go through them all. He wants to introduce a radical cheap energy policy, including fracking. I'm sure that's probably something that you'd agree with.
Yeah, Advance UK is about to launch its energy policy, which includes taking advantage of all fossil fuels which are available to us, reducing taxes and regulations on fossil fuel companies wishing to extract and sell fossil fuels. Did you know, Alex, that the cost of electricity in this country is set by the highest cost determined by a fossil fuel company, which itself is paying 40% taxes as a green levy? So we are taxing our way into energy insecurity.
Yeah.
He's absolutely right to say we should frack. And we've got 187 billion tons of coal under our feet. We've switched off our coal-fired power stations, unable to make the steel required to make the ships that might be required to defend the Falklands that you and I were just discussing. We've got to get our coal out from under the ground, fire up those power stations and get energy independence again.
All of a sudden, you'd find a lot of the people sitting at home twiddling their thumbs would have something to do as well in those particular communities. He wants to put the European Union on notice that he's going to scrap any Brexit reset deal agreed by Sir Keir Starmer. Definitely know as a Brexit Party MEP you're going to be into that one.
Well, we should scrap the trade and cooperation agreement that Boris Johnson signed.
Oh, I agree.
We've got to go further. We should scrap the withdrawal agreement. Take control of the United Kingdom. We're fettered. We can't leave the European Convention on Human Rights because of the TCA. We can't make employment law in this country without the EU complying with the EU regulations because of the TCA. We can't ditch net zero if we don't get out of the TCA. We can't buy British first if we don't get out of the TCA. That trade and cooperation agreement is an absolute kick in the shins to those of us who wanted to leave the EU. And it must all go.
Yeah. I can see you always used a different word, and then you suddenly rooted around your brain and found the word shins, and we were very grateful for it. Anyway, but let's talk now about a couple of things that I think he might be doing for political expedience. He's distancing himself from Donald Trump, saying he's starting to worry slightly about the judgment of his longtime friend. Do you believe it when he says that?
That's deeply concerning to me.
Yeah,
I mean, I think Trump uses language which perhaps doesn't find favour with the British political elite. But it's the British political elite who are the problem. And if you look at some of the tweets that Trump's been putting out in this war with Iran, he's speaking the language of the despots. He's showing the despots that he understands how they think, because they think through power plays. They understand what it means to be threatened. We can't take the namby-pamby approach of we live by the rule of law and we expect Iran to play nice. They won't. Trump has to speak their language if he's going to prosecute this war successfully. So I hope Farage won't go weak at the knees on Trump, and that we will support our American ally.
Yeah, no, I see. I must admit that one was. I think it's for political expedience. I think it's because public opinion polling, when it comes to attitudes towards Donald Trump, I'm not sure if it's really what he thinks and feels. But let's find out what you think and feel, shall we, about a couple of stories today. So much I could wind you up about, but I'm going to pick this one. We might have time to squeeze in some Hermer as well. But yeah, two stories today. One, gang of boaties, raping, spitting on, kicking in the head, dragging by the hair a poor innocent young lass in Brighton, and another one where Afghan asylum seekers been harassing primary school pupils and then spitting on their parents. Yay! I love these people here. I mean, we should beatify them. I don't know why we don't use the fourth column in Trafalgar Square to make a giant celebration of illegal immigration.
Well, I mean, it's abhorrent, isn't it? And, the issue that we've got in this country, obviously, I think all viewers will be familiar with the fact that we're hijacked by the European Convention on Human Rights, which prohibits us from being able to enforce our borders, requires us to treat these people when they bring in...
Does it, though? Because this is my problem, Ben. There are countries, and I believe it was Poland... It might have been. I mean, Hungary's definitely always been hardline on this, but Poland, I think, at one point said we can't take any more asylum claims. The Scandinavians, even the old lefty-loving liberal Scandinavians, seem to be tightening up a lot of policy. A lot of countries that sign up to that ECHR are not doing the mad things we're doing.
No, but I think what we've done, which is particularly mad, is take the ECHR and then put it into domestic law through the Human Rights Act.
Right.
Poland is still, it's a member of the European Convention on Human Rights, but it does what it needs to do to protect its borders. I mean, Poland's a great example. Belarus was, do you remember Belarus a few years ago was trying to export illegal migrants across its border into Poland?
Yeah.
Poland put up a big fence, put its army behind it and said, try.
Yeah, we'll shoot you. No, exactly.
Yeah, we'll shoot
Normal
you.
border policy, one might argue.
And that's what we need. We've got to stop looking at these people trying to break into our country through a humanitarian prism, thinking, oh my goodness, they're poor folk who are fleeing troubled parts of the globe. No, they're fleeing France. And as much as we might disagree with France, it is a perfectly safe country. That's number one. And we've got to look at it through the correct prism that these people are breaking international and British law in trying to enter our territorial waters and then our country. We need a border force that will enforce our borders. I've been saying this for such a long time, as you know.
Ben, I don't understand why these men are allowed out these hotels. They shouldn't be in the hotels in the first place. I know they should be instantly deported. But why are they allowed out to wander around when we don't know who they are? We know that at least a handful of these men will present a security risk. Yet this government's like, I know what we need to do. Let's stop anybody under the age of, 18 ever being able to buy cigarettes. How about you stop men raping little girls by saying you can't leave that hotel? We don't know who you are. You come from a misogynistic country. This has happened again and again and again. And do you know how many emergency debates I've seen in Parliament about the safety and protection of women due to asylum seekers wandering around raping people up? Yeah, exactly. None.
Yeah.
None.
And these people had already been refused asylum. They'd already been refused. And they went back after they raped this 33-year-old lady. They went back to their hotel and had a barbecue. I mean, it's...
they were sharing videos of it. They were celebrating. They'd all gotten together to get ready to go out for a little gang rape, fun night out for them.
It is barbaric. What we're allowing to happen, the non-enforcement of our borders and the protection and support we give these people when they come here, that's the barbaric act. Our government is committing barbarism against the British people. We are a civil society, and it is being assaulted and infected by barbarians.
Yeah.
And it's got to be said plainly.
Yeah. It does have to be said plainly. And, it's an offence against the British people. It's the women. It's the girls. What sort of society just turns a blind eye when it comes to the rape and attack of their daughters? Because the grooming gang crisis is happening again. What sort of sick, perverse country just turns a blind eye to that? I don't get it. Ben, stay where you are. I'm going to bring in a caller who wants to speak to us both. Laura Jane in Hampshire. Hello there, Laura Jane.
Hi, Ben and Alex. I think there's 2 points, which comes from the same. We are never going to get rid of this problem for the safety of women if we don't come out of the CHR. And then basically Starmer and his government and whoever replaces him, as it's going to be inevitable, they're not interested in this. They need the Muslim vote. And there's no way they're going to tackle this problem head on. It's not in their interest. And quite frankly, I think they just don't have the safety of women at the forefront of their policies. Never have done. I don't know whether that's misogynistic. Maybe that's going a bit far. But they're just not interested. And we have to come out of the CHR. And we have to get rid of this government because whoever comes after is going to be worse, as in after Starmer.
Is that possible?
Yes, of course it's possible. He's just a puppet.
No, I get that, but I kind of think getting worse than Starmer is quite difficult to achieve at this point in time. Ben, is there a possibility? I was just written a little note to myself, and I'm thinking, would there be any sort of avenue for one of these victims, the families of these victims, or maybe just an independent citizen or a political party, to actually take the government to court, to actually see if we can prosecute the people behind enabling this stuff? Because if it's their duty to make sure that the public are kept safe, how is it that with these migrant hotels, if I tried to walk into whichever hotel it was in Brighton, there are security guards who would prohibit me from entering that hotel where these asylum seekers were, without a doubt.
Yeah.
But you know, they seem to be like hanging around outside nightclubs at 2 o'clock in the morning. How are they wandering around? How are they being let out?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think Laura Jane made a very powerful point about the ECHR. And the ECHR, I think, again, is at the heart of this because it set aside an understanding of the difference between a victim and a criminal. And these illegal migrants are criminals, and yet we treat them as if they're victims. This is the problem. And I think the ECHR, embodied into UK laws through the Human Rights Act, it is the problem. And the reason I think it plays out the way it does is by the time this comes to court, the victim's already been victimized. And so the legal system seeks to protect the criminal just in case the criminal's innocent. And they give every presumption, including creating effectively what we've now done in this country, which is a two-tier criminal justice system, that will protect and promote the interests of these vile men over and above and to the detriment of the most vulnerable in our society.
What can we as citizens do right now? Because it's all very well going, well, you know, next time round, let's hope they get voted out. Next time round is still quite a long way away.
Yeah.
It's potentially 3 years
try.
away. How many more rapes are going to happen? At what point is one of these rapes going to end up in a murder? Do you know what I mean? Like, something's got to be done now. And I want to know whether there's something that we as private citizens could do, whether we can take Starmer to court and say, listen, mate, it's your fault that these women are getting attacked.
I mean, at a very basic fundamental level, I don't know if Laura Jane's still on the line, but at a very basic fundamental level, the government is in breach of its obligations to the British people. And we should be able to take the government to court and say, do your bloody job. We pay you money, taxes, to protect us, and you're not doing it. But I have, as you know, I fought at least one case, or I fought one case all the way to the Supreme Court against the government.
Yeah, I know.
And every step of the way, the judiciary was against the British national interest.
Well,
every step of the way.
Ben, I think this needs to happen again because the entirety of the public would be behind you on this one. It would unite the country. Let's take a short break now. Thank you to Laura Jane for your call. Ben, I think we're going to be hanging on to you if you're not otherwise disposed to go and do something else, because I really want to have a little prod at Lord Hermer and see what Ben makes of the successive front page of the Telegraph lately. If you want to join the conversation, do not hesitate. 03444 499 1000 is the number to call or to send a WhatsApp message to 87222 on text. Right talk before you text. We're going to be back with Ben just after this.
I hope I wouldn't have used that. Well, certainly I don't remember trying to get any job for my mates.
Can you get a job? Can you help get a job for ex's mates? But don't tell the Foreign Secretary.
I don't think it's completely surprising that the Prime Minister would be so sensitive about the way in which he was dealing with a member of his senior team, and particularly a Director of Communications who's in minute-by-minute contact with the media, that he would want that kept to a very, very tight group of people at the time.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back, Ben Habib. I've got my Lord Hermer statement here, which I'm going to read out after I've asked Ben what he thinks about our Attorney General. You know, the man who wasn't even elected, who was best mates with Starmer because they're so united on things like international law, who was given a peerage so he could be appointed our Attorney General. That's right, the man whose clients as a barrister included Jerry Adams, Shamima Begum and terrorists connected to the IRGC. I mean, it's like putting Harold Shipman in charge of an old people's home.
I mean, if you read the lists of people he's defended, it sounds a bit like the senior leadership of Al-Qaeda. You know, it's repugnant. And this is a man who's also advocated for Chagos being handed over to the Mauritians. He's the one who's advocated for the Caribbean islands to make claims against the British government for reparations over the slave trade. He's also the one who is now the champion of the Troubles Bill, which is a bill that's going through Parliament that will allow people to bring charges against British soldiers who were doing their duty, some of them up to 50 years ago. He stands against the country. Yeah. Hermer is an awful man. And as you mentioned, he was ennobled so that he could be brought into the cabinet. He wasn't even elected. Starmer loves this guy so much that he ennobled him so that he could do his malicious work for Starmer in the cabinet. That tells you precisely where Starmer is.
But how has he gotten away with this? You know, I've been banging on about blimmin' Irma ever since he appeared on the political scene, and I've been saying for ages, someone, please, look at the guy's back catalogue. It's all there, publicly available. How on earth is this guy, our anointed Attorney General, the highest legal office in the land, with access, because he has to have access to, if he's going to give the government legal advice, some of the most critical and sensitive intelligence and information that this country has, classified stuff. And, it's, you know, we're all getting our knickers in a twist about Ambassador Mandelson and have every right to do so. I think the Hermer thing's bigger and scarier.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they're all rotten, Alex. What I'm increasingly learning, I've been on a journey of discovery since I went into politics, and the discovery that I've been, the discovery I've made is that no matter how bad I think it is, it's even worse, and it just gets worse and worse. No matter how bad I think the political class are, they prove themselves to be worse than I first thought. And, the fact that Starmer was so clearly in favour of Mandelson taking that role, the fact that he's put Hermer in charge of our judicial system, in effect. I know we've got the other guy, David Lammy, as Justice Secretary, which is an equally big joke. But the fact that he's done all of this tells you that the rot is deep and it's wide.
I mean, this is the thing. Let's read out Lord Hermer's statement, and then we'll get back into some of the juicy details. So this is, I mean, what the Telegraph have focused in on, and I think there's going to be more because they haven't sort of mentioned IRA, they haven't mentioned Shamima Begum. You know, they're going in on this witch hunt of our soldiers. What was known as the Al-Swedi claims. It turned out that these people who pretended they were taxi drivers and, ordinary folk from Iraq, and, we were attacked by UK soldiers. No, they were terrorists. They were terrorists connected to the IRGC. And Hermer was warned about this. He's like, well, some of those prosecutions might not stand up. He was warned about it. And then he spoke to his little mate, Martin Day, who's working on the case, and said, quick, get it out there. Get on the Today programme. Get this story as far and wide so we can get as many punters as possible. We'll have to give ourselves wriggle room, though, in case it's not true. What sort of a sicko does that? Anyway, he claims... A spokesman for the Attorney General said Lord Hermer did a small amount of work at the start of this case, where he made clear that serious allegations at the time needed further investigation. This next bit really gets me. The attorney argued it would be unfair on armed services personnel if they didn't have the opportunity to show their innocence through a proper investigation. The Attorney General had minimal involvement in the Al-Swedi claims, limited to a small number of hours between 2008 and 2013. It's 5 years, mate. As soon as the Solicitors Regulation Authority case was brought forward, the Attorney General was clear in his condemnation for the reprehensible behaviour of Mr Shiner that rightly led him to being disqualified and successfully prosecuted. That was because Mr Shiner was accused of fraud. But what we have since learned, and this is what is utterly crazy, he was actually challenged by the government lawyers over the fees he intended to charge for pursuing claims of murder and assault against British soldiers. Allegations he later found to be deliberate lies. The documents that the Telegraph have pulled together show that he wanted to charge basically no win, no fee, but a deal, but at double his usual fees, and he would have gained tens of thousands of pounds if he had succeeded, if the government agreed to lucrative taxpayer-funded settlements. We'd have been paying this Irma tens of thousands of pounds. He justified the potential payout by arguing that the claims had only a 50% chance of success because, get this, the army had already investigated and found the allegations unsubstantiated.
And he still took the case.
And he still took the case, and he pushed, didn't he, for there to be a big press release on this, a big sort of, you know, press conference, talk about how dreadful our soldiers are, because he wanted all the cash money. He's a sicko.
But what, you know, the sentence that really struck me that you read out was him saying that he wanted to give the soldiers an opportunity to prove their innocence. And that's, as a legal man, he should know that that is an absolute nonsense. All of us are innocent unless we're proven guilty. No one needs an opportunity to be proven innocent. Under the British system, we're innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
And the reason he's turned it on its head is because we have become increasingly infected by European Union law, where everyone has to consistently prove their innocence. The presumption of innocence in the UK has substantially been set aside. And we experience this, I'm digressing, but it's really important. We experience this right across the United Kingdom, in business, in public sector, in our educational establishments. Everyone now is having to tick boxes to prove that they're innocent, that they're good people. Whereas in the past, unless you were accused of something and found guilty, everything you did was fine. Hermer is disingenuous when he says he wants to give the army, or those members of the army, the opportunity to prove their innocence. They were innocent. They needed no opportunity for it.
And as we know, the MOD, the army, he said in his own blimmin' thing there that he knew that there was not much chance of success because the army had already investigated and found the allegations unsubstantiated. He's got to go.
Never been brought.
He's got to go. Ben, unfortunately, so have you, but only temporarily from this show. I'm sure we'll have you back on to speak about more things in the future. Right, OK, we're going to take a short break now. If you want to get in touch with the programme, you should know the numbers by now, unless you're a newbie. But if you're a newbie, here they come. 03444 99 1000 is the number for WhatsApp. You can also send me a text on 87222. Write the word talk before you text. Back in just a moment.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Now, Very clear that Donald Trump is no big fan of Sir Keir Starmer anymore. He basically says, well, you've got a bit of time, you might be able to sort things out. He means in his own country, not so much the relationship, but seems to be pushing for the idea that we should get fossil fuels out the North Sea and sort out immigration. Couldn't agree more. But other than trying to tell Starmer how he should be running the country effectively, he's also pretty fed up with the way that Europe treated him when he decided to go do the necessary bombing of Iranian nuclear sites and Iranian armed assets. Thank goodness he brought the world away from the precipice of having some sort of nuclear weapons in the hands of mad terrorists. Thank you, Mr. Trump. Well, no thanks to Europe, who not only dithered and hesitated and in some cases blocked America from using US air bases on the continent, they even put in place no-fly rules so American planes couldn't go over their countries. I mean, you can understand why he's now got a fairly vengeful appetite and why at the Pentagon they're looking at ways to punish Europe because, frankly, Europe probably needs to be punished. Can't keep going over to America with a begging bowl saying, help us with Ukraine, and then do that for crying out loud. And it turns out that they've looked at the ways in which Britain could be punished, and one of them is threatening to not be there if Javier Milei decided he was going to take a lunge at the Falkland Islands. Javier Milei, of course, got a very special relationship with Donald Trump. Well, let's speak now to Rear Admiral Chris Parry, who's an ex-NATO commander and a former Royal Navy commander and a Falklands veteran. I get the impression that, you know, Donald Trump isn't necessarily going to do anything, but I can sort of understand why he's looking at this, going, why should I continue to uphold and defend the interests of Britain when people like you are actively obstructing American interests?
Yeah, I think people are overreacting to this. It is just a list of possible things that could be done. I doubt if the president's even heard about it, to tell you the truth. It's a leaked Pentagon memo. And of course, every Department of War or Defense does what ifs. So I think we need to play it down a bit. The fact of life is that the United States at the moment does not recognize British sovereignty over the Falklands. It recognizes that we administer the place. Now, that's been in position now for the best part of 20 years. The Obama administration confirmed it. So they have a very ambiguous position. And in fact, if you look back to the late 1970s and early 80s, we're exactly in the same position where the Reagan administration was trying to keep on side with the regimes in South America, whilst at the same time trying to balance its interests with the NATO allies. And it was only 5 days into the war that the Americans finally said, OK, we recognise the Brits' right to take the Falklands back. So we shouldn't be under any illusions. The Americans weren't exactly on our side. They didn't fight for us in the Falklands. They allowed us access to intelligence and some weaponry and logistics. But apart from that, they weren't exactly on our side. Now, where President Trump is a bit upset is that, of course, Keir Starmer made the catastrophic mistake of saying that they couldn't use the airfields at Diego Garcia, funny old thing, and also Fairford in Gloucestershire. And that meant that the B-52 bombers had to do a 36-hour round trip in order to do the bombing runs on Iran. Well, you know, I'd be pretty upset if our major ally had done that to us. They wouldn't have done it to us if we'd had the Falklands crisis yet again. And so I'm pretty sympathetic, I'm afraid, to the Americans about what this UK Labour regime has done.
What do you make of the front page of the Telegraph the last couple of days and finally someone twigging that Lord Hermer is probably the worst possible appointment as Attorney General, considering he wanted to line his pockets by conducting what appears to be a witch hunt against UK soldiers?
Alex, we've got a parasitic cabal of human rights lawyers who, I'm afraid, for the last 20 or 30 years have been leeching off the resources of our state in their own personal interests and also to satisfy their own vanity. And I'm afraid it's come out into the open now, as it normally does. And, you know, there's a whole festering mass of them. It includes Philip Sands, the chap who's been trying to negotiate away the Chagos Islands. I'm afraid the Prime Minister's involved in this, and Lord Hermer right at the heart of it. I mean, this is the guy, let's not forget, who accused quite a lot of people of being fascist and Nazis because they wanted to withdraw from the ECHR. And, I mean, for heaven's sake, when you've got an attorney general who calls quite a lot of the population fascists and Nazis, how can you expect to get justice in this country?
I mean, do you think he essentially needs to go? Because I regard this as the Mandelson thing is harrowing. It's scandal, unprecedented, frankly, to put that man in that position as a fait accompli. And the Prime Minister's been dragged over the coals for that. Like I said, I'm staggered that it's taken this long for somebody to suddenly realise that that is a political appointment that is probably one of the most dangerous political appointments in the history of political appointments. Should we all be clamouring for Herma to go?
Well, Alex, I've known Peter Mal since university, and having watched his career, having known what he was like at 19, 20, 21, and then seen him sacked from government twice, the thought that he should be put in a position of responsibility with access to the highest level of security classification we've got and top secret additional material is absolutely scandalous. And the idea that he should be motored into office without any vetting and with pressure from number 10 to actually let's look the other way. I mean, the impression I got from that was, without anybody saying it, the Foreign Office were probably hinting there's a few problems we've got here. And the Prime Minister said, well, I don't want to know about it. That's what I'm getting from the evidence so far. That's reading between the lines. But you're absolutely right. We need to get rid of both of them. Starmer and Herma, let's buy one and get one free. I'm afraid to say that the country would be a better place without them, both of them.
Did you know Mandelson at university?
Yeah, I did.
What was he like?
Was in my year. Well, I was in the same year, believe it or not, as Tony Blair as well. I found him. I found Peter Mandelson a slippery, sinuous character, not somebody I would take to. I'm not like him at all. And the only times I've come across him, he was doing political and, shall we say, activist activity that I found quite distasteful.
What sort of stuff?
Well, I mean, in the days when obviously there were the fight for all sorts of equality rights, he was right in the forefront of that. And he also, shall we say, pushed very left-wing, almost communist views at the time. So, I mean, there's an interesting story, Alex, that he and his group were having tea on the second quad of my college, and the captain of rugby came back and said to them, do you want more water with your tea? And they said yes. And he went away and got a hose and hosed them down. And they certainly got more water than they bargained for.
Where's that captain of rugby now? I want to know where he is. I'll have him on the show. I'll shake his hand personally.
Alex, I know where he is.
Oh, good. Pass on my regards, would you? He's suddenly become my favourite person. But, I mean, where do we go now in terms of all of this? I've heard that Herma's now reported for misconduct over the case against veterans.
Well, absolutely. I think there's a valid case, and if he's found to be at fault, then I hope he'll be disbarred.
Oh, hold on. Ted's just said to me you were the captain of rugby who turned the hose on Mandelson.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Innocent until proved guilty, Alex.
This is like one of my favourite moments on live radio. Well, there we go. We now know who the hero of the hour is. And on that note, rather than ruin this moment, let's love you and leave you as the man who famously hosed down Mandelson and his leftist friends at university. Rear Admiral Chris Parry. At home, come on. Deserves a round of applause, doesn't it? Right. Okay, we're going to take a short break now. And, oh, look, in another staggering example of, wow, that took you a while to figure it out. Apparently, the boss of M&S has said that the self-checkouts are fueling the shoplifting crisis. You don't say. We're going to be discussing it after this.
I hope I wouldn't have used that. Well, certainly I don't remember trying to get any job for my mates.
Can you get a job? Can you help get a job for ex's mates? But don't tell the Foreign Secretary.
I don't think it's completely surprising that the Prime Minister would be so sensitive about the way in which he was dealing with a member of his senior team, and particularly a Director of Communications who's in minute-by-minute contact with the media, that he would want that kept to a very, very tight group of people at the time.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Welcome to the studio, Mike Neville. Now, who would have thought the minute you say, let's not have checkouts anymore, everyone can just scan and pay for their own shopping? Who would have thought that might end up in a little bit of extra shoplifting? I find it rather incredulous that the boss of M&S has said, well, you know, having self-service checkouts seemingly put shoplifting on trial, on steroids. Of course it has. And I'm pretty sure that they priced this in quite cynically when they suddenly went, do you know what? We're going to have to pay staff, we're going to have to pay for their pensions in the future. Let's just get rid of all those jobs and put, you know, let people check out their own shopping, and hopefully it will end up breaking even or saving us some money. So I find it a bit rich to turn around now and say that self-checkouts are fueling a rise in shoplifting, but he's also saying that it's fueling a rise in shoplifting among good, honest people. I mean, you know, I even if it was just a grape, I couldn't do it. I couldn't be at a self-checkout and go, beep, beep, whoop, that one there. But, you know, temptation must be quite high for certain people.
Well, I suppose what happens as well, Alex, I was saying, you know, I did it. I went to a shop today and I was buying some Lemsips. So of course they might kill me. I might commit suicide because I've got paracetamol. So the red light flashes, and I have to wait for 5 minutes for somebody to come. And it'd be easy to say, I'm not waiting, I'll put them in my pocket and off we go. But of course, I paid for them. But what you can see here is, one, the shops are being hit by these very organised gangs who are stealing alcohol and just brazenly walking out with things that are easily sellable, like meat. But what these self-checkouts do, they sort of allow your sort of middle-class shoplifter, don't you, to replace the cheap eggs with the expensive eggs, or just to miss one thing out as you're going on. So, but as you say, they would have been cynical. They would have looked at that. They would know that some people would do it, and they would price it in. But it's the danger, isn't it, of not dealing with a person. If you're dealing with a person, cheating somebody, ripping somebody off is never a good thing when you've got to look them in the face. But ripping off a machine, I suppose if you're not so honest, it's an easy thing to do.
He has turned around though and said that self-checkouts were not to blame for the riots in Clapham, and blamed uncooperative police forces for failing to intervene against more prolific shoplifters who he said were clearing shelves to feed a habit.
Yeah, so we know that people do it. You know, they're stealing, they're often drug addicts. You know, and people don't commit one theft; they're committing hundreds of thefts. So when you get somebody who's got like 100 convictions, that probably means, you know, if you're solving 1% of thefts, it means they've done 10,000 thefts. And one of the problems with the Met, the chief inspector, who's the head of the business crime, he was saying, oh, they're not helping us. The businesses are not helping us, not giving us CCTV. And I know that that's my area of expertise, and I know that the police last year, the Met Police only got 1,700 images of criminals committing crime. Now, bear in mind, there was 900,000 crimes reported in London. So they're getting CCTV images from less than 2% of crimes. And a lot of those crimes will be shoplifting. So about 60% of the images you're getting, because that's the big bulk of crimes. And the police are still not using them right. So how is it in a city with 1 million cameras at least that the police are only getting 17,000 images in 1 year?
Well, you know, this actually reminds me that just at the end of last year I went to buy a little tweed jacket, actually, from a tailor's, and I'd put my handbag on the counter. It was a big old-fashioned tailor shop, one of the big sort of Victorian counters. My handbag was there as I was paying, and when I turned around, my handbag had been pinched, and I reported it to the police. I put it on social media, and it blew up. Mainly blew up because a load of leftists thought I'd made it up. Prove it to us, prove it to us. Well, actually, I was able to because they had the CCTV. The shop phoned me and said, look, someone's coming while you were paying. They've literally they put a coat down over the top of your handbag, and they've gone out with it, and we've got the CCTV. We're sending it over to the Met Police. So in the end, I got the Met Police contacted me with a crime reference number, and I could give that to the insurance. I've heard nothing since.
No,
nothing. And they've got the footage clear as day of the man nicking something.
And the man who's done it will not have done one. That's the thing. And so my expertise in the police, I had the super economizer unit, and they would look at all the crimes and link them all together. So just like you do with fingerprints and DNA. And we caught a guy, 43 crimes he committed, 43 images. And you don't need facial recognition machines, you need humans. And I know that, for example, in the Met, 80% of identifications are by humans, not these magic machines, because most of the images are blurry or angled. And so your image could have been dealt with much better. But the problem with images is if you leave fingerprints or DNA at a crime scene, there's a national database to run that against, and you'll be found out whether it's you committed a crime 250 miles away or they took your fingerprints 25 years ago. There is no national database of CCTV images, and the police are not judged on how they catch criminals with images. They're judged on how they catch people with fingerprints and DNA.
Why is there no database of sort of CCTV
because they
images?
don't look ahead. You know, I created one in the Met. They never had one before, but the Met has got that. But if you go from the Met into Surrey and commit a burglary, so you go from Croydon to Caterham, and you leave an image behind, you will not be, very unlikely that you'll be caught. You know, you get caught on CCTV in, say, where I come from, Bolton, and they'll show the image to people from Bolton. Do you know, any officers know this fella? No. The player doesn't come from Bolton. So if you go around and commit different offences in different places, it's very unlikely the police will link you by images. And it's one thing the Home Office could do very easily. I even offered to help them to do this. Create an image of a database of images and all the CCTV images of criminals committing crime, and they'll solve a lot more offences.
What's so ridiculous is even my blimmin' phone can do that. It could do that 5 years ago. I could sort of, say, find me pictures of this person by picking a photo, and it'd go through my photo line and be like, these are all pictures of said person.
More than 10 years ago, Alex, I had a conviction that my tie is a pattern. That's far easier than for a machine than a face. And it's really the software was designed for the advertising industry. If you put Coca-Cola on a football pitch or a Grand Prix racing car, you want to know how many seconds that's visible. So I use the same software, like the Talk logo on your mug, and I use that same software to catch a guy in 2 burglaries in the same T-shirt, and then another image of him. But they're still not using that today. That's 10 years ago. And so the police could do these things, but they wrapped up on this automated facial recognition stuff on the street, which is all very good, but it just annoys a lot of people. But they don't do the quick wins. So they've got hundreds of thousands of CCTV images of people committing crime, and they're not being identified. One of the police force I went to were identifying 6% of the images. What is the point of getting them? Yeah. It's pointless, and that frustrates people like you, because you think, you give up your privacy, you go in the shop, you're filmed, but you think, well, on the other side, the payback is if I get my bag stolen or get attacked, the CCTV's recorded it, and then the police don't use it, and that just lets people down, and it creates a lack of trust and confidence in policing.
It drives me mad. It really, really does, because, great, my insurance sort of paid for all the things that have gone missing, probably therefore lost my no-claims bonus or something, but it's more the fact that the man's gotten away with it scot-free. And it's all too often the same perpetrators over and over again blighting people. There was that story of the guy who had been a store manager in Morrison's for 29 years. And he knew this guy who was coming in shoplifting persistently, and he ends up losing his job.
Well,
Can't stop him.
There's him, and then there's the worker at the Waitrose.
The Waitrose guy,
it's a long way from Waitrose in Clapham to Morrison's in Walsall, but it's the same sort of corporate nonsense. But what shoplifters know now is what they've been told by the stores, in a sense, is if you offer any sort of violence, even if you say, get off me, they're not going to stop you. So you don't even have to conceal the goods, you just walk out with them. They know that the police are very unlikely to attend. Even if the police get them, and they charge them, well, the government have done away with 12-month sentences, so they're not going to go to jail unless they're the most prolific shoplifter in the world, because you never get more than 12 months really for shoplifting. And so they know there's little consequences of this. They know that 99 out of 100 reported thefts isn't solved. So if you're a thief and you look at it, you think, well, why not carry on? And then we have it's the story of modern Britain, isn't it? The prolific thief who committed the crime up at Morrison's, he gets away with it. He's got 100 convictions, so as I say, he's done 10,000 crimes, really. He gets away with it. The hard-working guy, 29 years loyal service, he gets the sack. It's just like we live in a topsy-turvy, sort of Alice in Wonderland, mad world, don't we, where decent people get sacked for doing a good thing.
And it's always us who has to pick up the bill financially as well, because I'd imagine every time, you know, people are doing a little spot of shoplifting here and there. Oh, I'm not going to pay for this brie, or I won't scan that, or, you know, they won't go to put for alcohol and look round and, you know, no one's there to sort of prove that they're over 18 or whatnot. They, you know, it ends up price rises.
Well, they're saying there's about an 11p tax, really, that finances shoplifting.
11p, what, on every good?
Yeah, I think on goods, on your shopping bill is 11p every time you go shopping because of thieving. And it's probably more than that now.
Wow. Really gets on my get.
Can I chip in on this, Alex Phillips?
No, you can't. You've got 3 hours to come. Don't be greedy. You've still got 2 minutes of my time.
All right, two moments. You know, occasionally when you just think, you know, when are people going to wake up? When is enough is enough? Yeah. So, for example, the horrific rape that we witnessed in Brighton yesterday. That's not enough to wake people up, with a grinning criminal going into court,
it's so gross,
laughing in our faces. Yeah. But then another one. The other day, I'm in a charity shop. I enjoy a charity shop, and they're good value, and you can fill your boots. Anyway, I'm in there. There's a security guard who's there in a charity shop now with a body cam, a security guard. And then I'm in one of those outlets. Are you familiar with the Wasabi chain?
Yeah.
They do these fancy sort of sushis and all that. Yeah. They got a security guard in there now. Mike,
they've got
what's
one
that
downstairs outside Itsu. They've got a security guard. So that one in the station,
Right, now that will
defending the sushi.
What do you reckon? It's probably
£300-400 a day, I reckon, at least.
All right,
a day.
And who picks up that cost?
Yeah. It's just ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, when you walk through London now, because it's especially like, look at, you know, I suppose big cities.